test. I am. I've just when I had the pre-meeting with Jason and Trudy, they said, I think it was you, Jason, said this is a big agenda, and it is. So I'm conscious that for the sake of everybody, we probably should get ourselves going reasonably. G'day, Scotty. How are you? I think you're the only one I haven't said hi to. Welcome back. That's good. I'll just check everybody's in here. That's good. Oh, Andrew, you should be coming to the. Don't sit down the back there, mate. Any management, come and sit up the front. Seriously, I'd rather you were around the table than not. Copper, there's plenty of room over here, Andrew. Come on over. I seriously, it's we're all part of a team here trying to do our work. So please come on over. Andrea's down there as well, which is good to see too. That's great. Brilliant.
Trudy's on her way. She got stuck with the weather.
I know. I better hear. Yeah. We virtually started from the same town, so I chose to fly, which was helpful, John, rather than trying to drive, as she clearly did. So look, welcome folk. I'd like to open the meeting. Jess and Jackie, I take it we're all okay to go live streaming wise. I think you folk will be well aware of it. I did make that comment before from Jason that we've got a full agenda, and actually I just want to reflect great papers. Jason, superb. I know that probably there's a whole bunch more than you, clearly Trudy and the team behind it, but I almost feel like we didn't have enough time to do justice to them, but then we'd be probably here for a couple of days to go right through them. So well done. I think it really is helpful that we have got good stuff. Andrea, welcome. I think you have had a promotion since I've last seen you, so congratulations. And it's great to have you here as well too. First day, exactly, that's right. And we've got the auditors as well. No, that's great. So it'd be great for the committee to be able to work with Andrea and look forward to that one as well, which is tremendous. We do have 3 sets of externals. In fact, one of them might well be here. John Mackey, our audit director, has asked to Zoom in rather than be here in person, which I said was absolutely fine, and we'll hear from John later. We do have a couple of folk from Aon Insurance, Matthew Wilson and Deanna McDonald, talk to us about insurance. I think they've got a valuable story to bring, and I think David Seth will join us at some stage further on the track. He's the internal, already providing a lot of internal audit support to us at the current stage, so it'll be good to hear from David too. In your agendas, you've got the full list, 14 reports and another 10 under public excluded. So that's why we've got a fair few to get through. I think pretty much is the way I'd like to take it. So look, just to get appropriate apologies, we look like we're a full muster, aren't we? Folk can stay through until about that 2 o'clock finish time. We're okay? Great. I haven't been told of any other urgent business, so we can move over that. I don't think there's any matters of a minor nature that we need to take account of. Are there any matters coming up that people need to declare their interests in? No? Looks like a pretty straightforward one. Yeah, Peter. In PX, yeah. Okay, no, I appreciate that. If we could just note that, Jess, please, that Peter's declared that. Okay, brilliant. Well, look, let's just do it. We'll do a recheck, Michelle, at the time we enter PX in terms of actual staying in the room. But at this stage, let's just note your declarations for the purpose of the public record, and that's good. Confirmation of the minutes. We have the meeting. Our last meeting was the 6th of March. I'm going to move from the chair that we receive them as a true and correct record. Over a seconder, please. Thank you, Janice. Is there any matter of correction or accuracy people want to raise with it? very readable and look very correct to me. So, so that's really good. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Garrett, I hope you have a good loud voice today so I can hear your voices, please. That'd be great. Is that a telling off? No, it's not. Far from it. Far from it. I just want to make certain that you're awake this morning, that's all. I've probably had too many coffees myself, so there we go. Jason, action points, item paper 6.1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is really to go through prior requests from the committee in terms of items that staff were to go away and work on. So it's critical that we do close some of these out. In terms of item 3, the interest register is now published on the TDC website and that's available for public viewing. So officer recommendation to close that. Item 4 had a discussion around comply with in terms of how we use it. We've currently got comply with out across the organisation at the moment, and we're going to be reporting those back to the September meeting.
I recommend we can close that too.
We'll close
it as well.
Health and safety performance report. We're currently using an Assura upgrade in terms of quality of information around health and safety space. We'll talk about it more in the health and safety report later in the agenda. We're completing that by 31 July, so I propose that we keep that one open for now. There was item 6, a request from the committee that the capital spend project management audit is important and brought forward. I have attached the draft terms of reference to the internal audit work program update, and Deloitte will be undertaking this audit. So it's up to the committee whether we open or close that one. The fraud and corruption gap analysis, we've got an update report on this agenda in terms of update and progress, so I recommend we close that. Item 8, the committee had asked that we brought the sensitive expenditure policy brought back to the committee. This has now been renamed the financial expenditure procedures and is included as attachment to the sensitive expenditure update. So I recommend we close that. Audit and Risk Committee asked Audit New Zealand to provide the 22-23 audit plan. So that's come through. That includes the audit engagement letter and the audit proposal letter. That's on the agenda later to have a discussion around. The internal audit program, there are 3 things that were requested, two things, that the onboarding induction process and exit process be reported back. That's an attachment to the report. And there was a request that the internal audit program include internal audits that we've completed in the last 2 years, just so the committee can see what we've done previously. So we've got that on the agenda. And the standing recommendations register, we've included the information management policy that SLT has approved. That's on the agenda. We now show when we've closed an item, and we did close 29 items this period. They're all included at the bottom of the outstanding recommendation register for one cycle, and we also show the date now of the actual audit. Mostly. Oh, okay. So we may not have done them all, but thank you.
So that looks to me like number 5 is the only one that's left open at this stage, and it's more a matter of process. Otherwise, I think we can treat the rest as closed, unless anybody else wants to suggest something different. So look, I'll move from the chair that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, please? Yes, thank you, Peter. Any questions or comments? Being none, I'll put all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Thanks for that. Jason, it's always good to be up to date with that. Right. John, we have our guests online, do we? Are we going to go, or do I move on to something different? You're going to be with us at 9:30? Yes. Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, let's move on to Jason. Don't go away. The committee program. We'll just keep working through until 9:30 when those folk can join us. So we can move on to item 6.3, which is the work program.
Yeah, so this is really for the committee's information in terms of reports and work that is coming up in front of them. The key points to note from my perspective in terms of standing agenda items, all of those items are on this agenda. In terms of other agenda items, I'll just draw the committee's attention to the insurance renewal. It was planned that we would be endorsing at this meeting, however the insurance has to be approved by 30 June. So having the ARC meeting just after 30 June is just, the timing didn't quite work. So a meeting was held with the chair of the committee to endorse the 23-24 program, and then that went through to council for formal adoption on the 27th of June as well. So I just wanted to draw the committee's note to that. Going forward, we will tie the work program into the timing of the Audit and Risk Committee so that we can have things in front of us at the right times. And the third thing really is under Audit and Assurance, everything's on track. Audit New Zealand is still completing the 21-22 annual report, and the management report's not been received at this time, but we're getting very close to finalising the audit, at which point we will receive the report and we'll report that back to the September meeting. So those were the key things I wanted to point out.
Thanks for that, Jason. Folk, do we have questions? Yeah, Scotty.
Thank you. Just one question with regards to, just from my understanding, of all of that most risks are scheduled for each quarter as a minimum. Why is the operational risk register only yearly?
I'm happy to answer that, John, might assist. So we do strategic risks on a quarterly basis, because the sort of 12 organisational strategic risks that the committee would want to hear. We do operational risks once a year, and that's because there's something like 30 units within council. We work through a process with them, and if there are any high or extreme, we will report those back to the committee. But at the moment, the work program talks to just bringing that back to the committee once a year, unless we have a direction otherwise.
Yes.
Chair, for the operational risk, they are reviewed every 3 months. Quarterly reviews happen every 3 months. But my understanding is that it's annually reported back to this committee on the progress, and what's, as Jason said, there's anything of importance, it would come to this committee earlier.
Yep, I'm comfortable with that, by the way, too, Scott. That is helpful. I think it's the way that we go. Otherwise, you know, our response is the big stuff. But what I want to just add to that, Scott, is actually our responsibility is to be through BEAD comfortable that the risk management process that has been set up by council is operating. And we do that. I mean, I think the report we've got coming up is good. Perhaps that's why you'd like to see it quarterly, because it's an interesting insight. But essentially, they're in the realm of Bede and his SLT team to manage. And our role is more that there is a system to manage rather than actually getting down into that detail. So our focus is on, quite rightly, the quarterly risk, as this John has said, and that's where we should take it, but it's still good that we see it annually. I think one of the things that it does come, and we might want to reflect as a committee, your point, John, is that if anything is significant, it comes up. The question is what constitutes significance. We have had an wrong word. We did do that work last year with Andrew Douglas, looking at the idea of risk appetite. And it may be, Jason, and John, that we perhaps just reflect where that's at. Are we still comfortable with it? Because that's going to dictate what gets escalated up. Because if something's outside our risk appetite, it should be coming to this committee, whether it's an operational risk or whether it's a big risk. So we can perhaps just, Jason, I'm sorry that I'm creating action points to you and John, perhaps you and I should just circle around and just check that one out, that we've got that right. Because we haven't talked about escalation in terms of the operational report, but we should perhaps just reflect, for your comfort, our comfort, what would come to this committee from the operational level and why would it come? Because we need to know that.
So just on that, Mr. Chair, as part of that, I agree with that, and that's going to be built into the new updated risk management policy framework document.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah,
when does that, I probably should look at my...
So the review of the policy framework is about to happen, the actual document.
Yeah.
Because we've introduced a whole new framework altogether into TDC.
Yep.
So the current policy needs updating to reflect that.
Yep.
And that escalation of what comes to that committee is part of that review period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that takes away the action point, Jason, so you can scrub that from your book. We'll have the policy when it comes up, and it'll give us a chance to look at, Scott, where I'm trying to get to is management deal with a whole bunch of risks which we don't generally have the optics over, but we want to know there's a system in place, A, for them to manage, and B, what would give rise to its escalation to us. and it comes back to what is our risk appetite. So we'll look for that when that comes through. Anything else on the agenda here, guys? Just noting, Jason, that we've got a meeting in September. In some way, the committee will need to transact some support for council when it comes to the annual report by the 31st, somewhere between, I suspect, the 20th of October and the 31st of October, if that's okay. But we can do this one off. Yes.
Through you, Mr Chair, we were looking to try and change the date of the September meeting.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, in order to try and line it up with the annual report.
Yep.
Because the annual report will be coming later in October, and we were hoping that if it would work, because the annual report won't be ready for review. So I think you, Jackie, were looking to arrange an alternative date.
Yeah, through to the 9th of October.
9th of October? What I'm trying to reflect is that the final, what is it, the final annual report's due on the 20th, so that's with all its amendments, correct? No, go to page 279, and I know John's on the line now as well, but if you go to 279, which is what I did, it's on the printed version. I don't know whether that's the same on I presume it's the same on the electronic agenda. You'll see here that the final annual report available, incorporating all amendments agreed between us, is due on the 20th of October. My only question is, should we be meeting somewhere between the 20th and the 31st? And one of the things that would come under this would be, do we have an effective date for when John is going to give us verbal clearance? So, look, if it's going to be the 9th of October, it's going to be the 9th of October, and we just need to think through what gets us to the 31st of October without too much inefficiency or administrative strife. But equally, in looking at this as committee chair, those two dates to me are pivotal to when and how we can as a committee fulfil our roles. So, B, that's a long way of coming back to, yes, understand you want to change it. Can I say, I think every committee in the country is changing their dates from a September meeting to October. So we can explore that as an action point coming out of the meeting. If I could just leave that. Yeah, Janice.
If we meet on the 9th and we get a reasonably final,
That's right.
we could perhaps approve it, delegate
Yeah.
minor amendments to
Yeah.
U and B.
Yeah. Well, that's the other option. That's why I'm saying it. And I mean, for personal reasons, the 9th will probably be better than the 21st for a whole bunch of reasons. But Jason, we'll just take that one offline and work that one through. In principle, happy we move it, unless there's any other objection. It does mean our distance between meetings goes out a month, but I think I'm comfortable with that. Nobody else is unhappy with that. Okay, we'll make that one work, and that solves my problem. So look, unless there's any other comments, can I just move from the chair that we receive and note the Audit Committee work program. Thank you, Nigel. I'll take it for granted that we realise September's going to have an October column there. It just all moves out. Any questions, comments? No. In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Oh, we've got time for more work. How's that? Outstanding recommendation register. I should have driven me nuts going through these schedules at the back here, Jason, but I got through them. In your hands.
Thank you. I would like to apologise to the committee. The original date I noted is now shown in the register.
Oh, okay.
I show it in the Excel version of the register, however it was transposed to Word and that column was missed off. So as Janice pointed out, there's a column missing which we had added in around the date of the audit, the original date that each audit was undertaken. So I'll email committee members with a version which includes that.
You don't need to do that.
That's just for your information.
Just for next time.
So it's been a long time since the 6th March meeting. We've had a bit more resource in place and we really have tried to focus on the outstanding recommendations. We had 58 at the end of the March meeting. We managed to close 29 during this quarter, and I'm not going to go through them. What I will focus on is the ones that are remaining. So we've got 29 recommendations outstanding. Of concern, I guess, is that 26 of them are overdue. And if I just sort of talk to some of those. So 12 of the overdue ones relate to, I guess, historical recommendations from Audit New Zealand. We're still working through with John and his team on some of these ones, and some of these flow into recommendations which will come out in this audit that we're currently finalising as well. 8 recommendations relate to the ALGIM audit, so the Association of Local Government Information Management. We've been waiting to get the information management policy signed off, which SLT has signed off, and it's attached to this. So there's a whole lot of work that can flow following that now. And so I'm hoping that by the September and or October meeting that we've finished a lot of those ones. Fraud and corruption, we were very aggressive in our desire to have finished that by 31 December. With lack of resourcing, we sort of struggled with that. We've brought Deloitte in over the last 3 to 4 months to help in that space. There's a couple of reports on this agenda that talk to that. We've focused on 4 priority recommendations, and there still are 4 other recommendations which we'll focus on throughout the rest of the next couple of months. There's a standardised cash handling policy that we're going to finish by the end of September, and one also relates to procure to pay, which we are just working through. We've selected a vendor which will come up in the business improvement section when we talk about ESCA. So those are the ones which are outstanding. Happy to take any questions on any of the detail of the recommendations.
Thanks, Jason. Scott?
Just one question with regards to on page 41, number 140, that we highlight this as an option for council with regards to forestry internal audit report. Consider investigating further the expansion of forestry activity with the aim of providing a return to council. The status update there, it provides an update as such, but for me it doesn't actually answer the question whether the activity expansion will be considered.
I see fingers pointing. Is that your way, is it, Andrew?
So we do have Bill Steens coming in to talk about the Pariora Dam later today, and if Andrew's unable to provide any clarity around that, he could answer it at that time. But Andrew, any comment for now?
So this is about the dam, the forestry side of things, yeah. Yeah, so we're managing our forestry assets, I think reasonably well, yeah. We are there has recently been a link audit to tying up with the ETS side of things. Is there anything else you want to know? Yeah.
Well, just reading that particular recommendation, it suggests considering investigating further the expansion of activity, and to me that's not clear. If it is clear, if you can better explain what the consideration is with the expansion of it as an activity. I read about the ETS, but as a venture to provide greater return to council, it's just not clear to me what the consideration is.
So the implication here, I would take it as that in fact the answer is no, there won't be an expansion. Yeah. And I think your question is that the conclusion we've reached? Yes. So Michelle?
Didn't we at our last meeting talk about having a strategic management plan for our forestry assets when we had that forestry audit come back and was presented to us?
So I can't tell you that. We'd have to go back and check the records. Yes, Pete?
Yeah, it might be up top here. Through the activity management plan, we would look at what options there might be for forestry. Couple of things on the ETS, TDHL. It's probably, would it be 12 or 18 months ago, Andrew? They went and looked at the commercial viability of investing in forestry for effectively in terms of whether there was a return using ETS as the sort of the basis of the return in addition to the capital growth. And they did that after some preliminary work by us, which we then handed on to them, which showed that in terms of for council, there was a lot of risk for us going and looking to acquire forestry because for that purpose, they concluded much the same, and they did more in-depth work which they provided to us that actually there wasn't at that time, and potentially there's even less now with the range of issues that have emerged around forestry as to whether or not there would be any benefit. So we haven't pursued it from that point of view. The next time when we would look at it would be through the activity management plans that we do as part of the long-term plan as to whether or not there is and that's something that can be looked at. We can note that in terms of whether or not there's a commercial benefit in us expanding further. But I think generally what our team have found when they've looked is that within the district there's not land that would immediately present itself as being suitable for council to acquire with a view to using it for forestry. But Andrew, I don't know if you have more on that, but we could look at it as part of the activity management plan. Where the work was that got to that had been done was there was a lot of risk for us to go and acquire forestry for the purposes of the carbon trading scheme, and we would almost certainly have had to go outside of the district or do it via some secondary fund to do that. Don't know if that helps.
Yes, Peter.
Yes, I can attest to the TDHL review on it, and I remember that very clearly, but I also remember us having some significant conversations in council in regard to that, and I know because Councillor Booth had driven it quite strongly, and I think the appetite, it really came back based on all the variables and the risk for it, that we didn't have the appetite to look at that any further, but I'm not sure where that got closed out or not, but I'm taking when I read this that was the case.
That's the implication from it. Yes, that's the implication that I took from it. Scott, B?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that all that work occurred prior to the election. So it was prior to when you were on the council. But we could go and revisit or represent that work, which might be helpful if you like.
Well, I wonder then just to assist perhaps the four new councillors, if we could, it doesn't even need to be revisited, I don't think, but if you could provide that information, that'd be useful.
Yeah, we share the information. I don't think it has to come back to the committee, Scott. I think it's the point you're making. So yes, I think that's a good way to go about it. I mean, the logical time, by the way, if you are wanting to suggest a revision, which wouldn't be from this committee, would be actually in your LTP work. But that's a different. I'm glad to say different to me. So making information available sounds like the key thing for Scott and probably Michelle and some of the other people.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's just a matter of process. In order for this to work, if we can just add it to the resolution that will provide that information, because then it falls as an action point. That means it gets followed up all the way through the system.
We'll do
not back here in September or October, you are asking where it is.
Yeah.
Because we've actioned it then via our action point.
Okay. So Jess, if you could just note that we'll resolve that the information related to forestry be passed on to new members. It may even be that you want to put it to all councillors so that they're aware of it. So perhaps just the councillors would be fine. Any other comments? So yes, Michelle.
I just had a question about page 31, and it's on the asset renewals and disposal. So it has an auditor comment there, but it doesn't seem to be a council response to that auditor comment. So what are we doing now? It's just at the bottom of page 31, it says the proposed approach does not fully address the recommendation.
So the process that I went through with the Audit New Zealand ones was I provided responses to Audit New Zealand that I thought closed them out. Audit New Zealand on this one come back saying, actually, we don't quite think it's closed out for the reasons that they've specified. So we're still in progress in terms of some of the activities that we're focused on. One of our challenges is that because we haven't closed out this year's audit, we can't do our capitalisation, we can't do all the things we'd normally do by now, which puts us at risk already before we started the next annual report, that we haven't done some of these things. So the sooner we can close out our audit, not just from a tick the box exercise, it means that Andrea and her team can get on and do some of those things. So at the moment we can't close that out because we're still in progress.
And there are a few of those, aren't there, Jason?
There are a few. So anything where it says in progress, where I wanted to update the committee with where we actually think we are. Audit New Zealand have provided some guidelines in terms of where they think we are, and we're still working towards them.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Look, it strikes me that I think firstly we should just acknowledge, Jason, the effort of the team to get rid of these. The fact that you've got over, well, yeah, half of them out of the way is actually substantial. And while I suspect you'd like a few more to have been closed out, as in like the last one, at least there's clear action. We know where we stand, and we've got some action. So that's pretty. I'm quite comfortable with that. Thank you for indicating the nature of the broad ones. I think actually later in the meeting we deal with things like the Elgin cybersecurity assessment. So we've got a sense of being able to revisit that even within this meeting. So unless members, there's other comments you'd like or questions you'd like to make, I'm going to propose that we move to the resolution. All right, Peter, you're moving? Realising there's a small amendment that we make the forestry information available to councillors. Do I have a second? Thank you, Scotty. Any debate on the motion? Being none, I'll put it all those in favour. Please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Right, John, we're past 9:30. Are our friends with us? Oh, that looks like they are. I can see Matthew. We're waiting for Deanna, are we? G'day, Matthew. How are you, mate? Are we waiting for Deanna, or are you the light brigade?
I'm the light brigade today, I'm afraid. Deanna is currently in transit to yourselves for another meeting later on. We just couldn't get the logistics to work out to be there on time this morning, unfortunately.
Oh, well, welcome to the meeting, Matthew. And look, just good form. What I'll do is I'll ask John here to just address the item, and then I suspect pretty quickly we're going to hear from you. So, John, is there any comments you want to make before we open up with Matthew?
Just basically, we've asked Aon to come along just to give one of the things that's identified is that going forward with our insurance program, we should move away from a transactional approach to a strategic approach. Earlier in the year, Aon did a presentation on this. It's just to re-emphasise what we should be looking at moving forward and working with Aon on this approach, because it is quite resource intensive. But also they're going to talk about collective insurance, the pros and cons of that as a council, and just some general trends of what they're seeing. So Matthew, I hand it across to you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Welcome, Matthew. Anybody that's worked around the sector, I guess as I have, Matthew's a regular feature at a good number of audit committees. So Matthew, look, John, thank you for that lead, and I just wonder if I could just re-emphasise, Matthew, I would be very interested that you are clear for us as a committee the difference between being strategic and transactional over our insurance. And also, I hear with some interest the idea of a collective, which obviously through you I'm much more familiar with from a Waikato Bay of Plenty perspective. So if you could make certain your comments you address those, that'll be fine along with your general update. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thank you for the time this morning. I will rattle through some of this. I know we've probably got a bit of time constraints, but this is absolutely not death by PowerPoint. Please sing out as we go along if there are any questions that come to mind. I shall share my screen if I can press the buttons in the right order. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know if that's something we can fix at your end.
Just wait a sec, Matthew. Yep, you might have challenged us here technically, Matthew. So I think Jess might be solving the problem.
Okay. Well, whilst that's happening, I'll give a brief background. So you understand where we, Aon, are coming from. As Bruce has just alluded to, we are quite a large player in the local government sector as a broking firm. In one way or another, we act for about 70 councils in New Zealand. I have been doing council business since 2009, and there are a lot of themes that come up. We have a group of people within Aon who basically do councils. That's what we do. We've set up a practice group to ensure that we get delivery of the same message and also share information with each other about the issues that we are seeing in the local government sector. The current market is challenging. And hopefully if we can get the IT to work, I've got a couple of graphics that we can put up.
Matthew, you should be able to share your screen now.
Be good.
With a bit of luck.
Perfect. Hopefully that's the right one. Can you see?
We're good to go. Good to go, Matthew. Good to go, man.
Good go. Excellent. Okay, so I'll just hopefully these slides change over. So I started to ad lib a little. We'll talk about who the team is very quickly. We'll give you a very brief market update, and then the core part of this is about changing from a transactional approach to buying insurance to a more strategic approach, and then we will touch on collective purchasing. So, as I said, we've got a team of people. This is us. There are others, but these are the ones who you will have interactions with. Steve Kane is the head of Aon's local government practice. He's based up in Auckland. There's myself and Deanna, who some of the team will meet with later. We have local South Island representation. Sally Parker is the main day-to-day contact for you. And David Robson on that list is based in Hamilton with me. He is our infrastructure person. So we're talking about the reticulation network, etc. So that's who we are. The markets. I was just starting to talk about this. None of this is rocket science. We have seen over the last 5 years, basically for each year for the last 5 years has been the worst year on record for weather-related losses. So what we're talking about there are storms, cyclones, hurricanes. There are other natural disasters, but weather-related losses have increased significantly. Hurricane Ian in the US, that's a significant loss which has impacts on the global insurance market. And of course, this year we have seen the events take place in Auckland, Northland and the Hawke's Bay. So previously, insurance markets used to focus on, but the price drivers were the earthquakes, volcanoes, these big catastrophic events. What we are seeing is an increase in frequency and severity of what the insurance market calls secondary nat cat events, i.e. those weather-related events. And that's not changing, it's just getting worse. If we bring that to a local perspective, i.e. a New Zealand perspective, and what you have to remember is, whilst we place business locally for yourselves within New Zealand, all of the insurance market, those New Zealand-based insurers largely have offshore ownership. Insurers reinsure. So when there is a major loss, there is flow-on effect to the reinsurance markets as well. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of those statistics out to you. But as you can see, there are some significant numbers in there. The dollar values will always be what the dollar values are. I think the one that gives us an idea of the severity of these events is if you think there's over 14,000 claims have been paid out already. Yes, they are mostly in the private motor household space, but they are significant volumes. And there are some large corporate losses within that as well. We act for Hawke's Bay Regional Council. They have suffered significant damage to their infrastructure, river protection network. So what does this mean in the current market space? I will come back to that slide in a second. What this means is increase in reinsurance costs. Some insurers in New Zealand, we're talking about property placements. Some insurers in New Zealand have already stated they're looking at a 20% rating increase. They may start to look at applying differing deductible levels for flood weather events. And there is another adjunct to that, which is the impact of class actions and litigation funding from a liability perspective. We have already seen allegations arising towards some of the Hawke's Bay councils that it's their fault that all of this happened. Now, I'm paraphrasing hugely there, but we are expecting to see parties try and hold councils responsible for some of the damage that they have suffered, whether that is that they allowed them to build in a certain area in the first instance, or is that something along the lines of maintaining assets or keeping things up to date. Those may well be spurious, but there is a slightly personal opinion here. There is significant money at stake that somebody will look to chase some of that money to get back. So we will keep a close eye on this, but that is what we are expecting. So we have market pressures, we have increasing costs, and then currently we have a double whammy, which is why I'm coming back to this slide. Inflationary pressures. I haven't read a newspaper yet this morning. I don't know what's happening in Russia and whether Putin's still in power, but there are lots of global events taking place which are impacting supply chains, which therefore is impacting cost. There are labour shortages. And as you can see from that graphic, although that is a little old now, New Zealand inflation is up there. You know, we're living in inflationary times, and I don't need to tell any of you that. You only need to go grocery shopping at the moment. Why is that an insurance consideration? It's an insurance consideration because the cost of rebuilding anything is increasing. So your premiums for your property and for your infrastructure are largely based on a rate percent applied to the total value of those assets. And at the moment, we are seeing significant increases in the value to replace those assets because of these inflationary pressures. So when we talk about here that there may be a 15 to 20% increase on rate, if your values have gone up by 15%, you're potentially looking at a 30 to 40% premium increase. Now this, we are acutely aware there is an affordability issue with local authorities on this, on the impact of these premiums, which is why we then get into the whole conversation, excuse me, of strategic versus transactional. So historically, and this isn't a comment about yourselves directly, but historically, councils have purchased insurance. They're quite a risk-averse organisation, and there are many reasons for that. And historically, councils have bought programs which are basically off the shelf. We buy one of those, two of those, one of those, that transactional purchase. With the issues around affordability, we need to now start looking at what can you do. The market is always going to be what the market is, but what can we do to mitigate the impacts of the market? So there is a relatively simple graphic explanation to this, although it's actually quite hard to do. And this is the journey we're going to start working with John and the team shortly. If you change an insurance program because it is driven by the price, in my opinion, that is the tail wagging the dog. What you actually need to do is go through a process where if you look at this hexagon, if you go in a clockwise direction, you have to go through a process, and the very last point on that process is optimizing the insurance program. And this could be something as simple as, can we afford to take a big deductible on our material damage program? Now, there has to absolutely be a cost benefit for you on that. But do we understand the exposures and the risks that you face? What is that second point, risk positioning? What is your financial ability and willingness to accept those risks? You may have a very, very strong and healthy balance sheet, in which case you could consider some of this. What are the controls and preventions? What are you doing about asset management? Are you looking at the condition of properties, and are you making decisions about whether you would replace some of those properties if they were lost? And if we go through this process, and there is a structure to it, if we go through this process, at the end of it, there is the option to look at buying an insurance program, which could be significantly different from the one that you have currently, but is more fit for purpose, or I should say fit for your purpose. And it is unique to you. So I did skip over one slide. It's a little bit heavy probably for going through completely, but it gives us an idea of a bit of a thought process. There are some risks and exposures that you have to retain. And if you think about that as being for your own home insurance or your own business insurance, that is the stuff the insurers won't cover. Now, traditionally, this is a deductible. You might have a $500 deductible or a $1,000 deductible. Then there is some stuff that you can transfer, and you may have capital that can sustain losses in that stage. And then you get to a point where there's stuff you have to transfer, i.e. you can't afford to take the exposure yourself. Now, these are relatively simple words, but actually understanding what your appetite looks like and how your funds are and what the longer term plan is, these are the things that we need to go through with you. Are there any questions on that? I have rattled through it a little bit, but are there any questions on that at the moment?
In effect, Matthew, you would argue our approach to data is transactional, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
To be fair, Bruce, I think most, with the exception of a few, most councils are currently at this stage where they are looking to change from transactional to strategic.
Right. So the critical thing here, folk, is that move to, as you say, off the shelf, we like that, we don't like that, we'll take it, we won't take it, to one which is more embracive of the nature of risk. Is that comfortable? Do people have questions around that they'd like to raise? No? We're okay, good to go.
Okay. Right, so collective purchasing. One of the things that we have been very successful at is arranging insurance procurement on a collective basis with members of a group. For example, we have the Waikato group of councils through their local authority shared services arrangement. We purchase, we purchase one insurance program. If I focus on material damage, it's the easiest one to explain. We purchase one material damage policy for them. That group of councils probably declare somewhere in the region of, I don't know, two and a half, or maybe not that much, $2 billion worth of assets. It's a very, very, very bad day in the Waikato. Oops, sorry. It's a very, very bad day in the Waikato if we were to lose $2 billion worth of assets in one go. We are talking about Armageddon scenarios. So what we do is go through that hexagon previously, establish some appetites, and then buy a loss limit. That limit is shared across the member councils. So what are the benefits of doing that? Well, straight off, there's economies of scale. If you're wanting to buy, it's just like buying anything else. If you want to buy one of something, it comes with a price. If you want to buy 100 of something, that unit price is less. The same is true for insurance. And by having in the Waikato group, for example, 10 councils collectively purchasing, there are economies of scale to those individual councils involved. We can get more market interest. As I said, we're going to the market with $2 billion worth of assets, rather than just say, and I always pick on poor old Otrahonga, who are the smallest council up there. rather than with, I can't remember their number, $50–60 million worth of assets. So there is more market interest. Because of that, we get a better rate for the group than you would do as an individual. However, we have kept the flexibility within the arrangement that each individual member can have its own limits and deductibles. So, as an example of strategic versus transactional, if you buy an insurance program which is based on a total of all of your declared values for property, we don't do that for the Waikato councils. We go through and look at what is the realistic likelihood that you're going to lose all of your stuff in one go. It's very, very remote. And therefore, we don't need to buy to the full value of those assets in terms of an overall sum insured. We buy a loss limit. That also introduces more insurers to the market because they're not putting up so much capital, which then loops back to the competitive rates. Now, there are, frankly, some downsides. Claims management, most councils that are in a group have some form of memorandum of understanding around how claims proceeds are shared out, and it's not particularly complicated, but it does have to be gone through. And there is also a little bit of the share the gain, share the pain philosophy to this. Motor, for example, we buy collective motor policies. If one council has a really, really bad year because of an outlier claim, they don't necessarily get pinged for all of the increase in premium because they've had the claim. That increase in premium is shared amongst the members because there's no reason why it couldn't have been another council. So we do operate on that basis, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives, especially in the current market that we're in. And to be honest, we don't foresee that market changing anytime soon. So we're floating this idea past yourselves, and we act for a couple of other councils within the region. And it's a longer term conversation, but we are trying to establish if there's any appetite, again, assuming that there is a cost benefit to you, if there is any appetite in being a little bit more collective and collegiate in the purchase of insurance programs. Are there any questions on that?
Thanks for that, Matthew. That's really helpful. I think you've got one, Janice.
Thank you. Matthew, I've had some experience with collectives, particularly in the university sector. And if you're the biggest or the smallest, it can be slightly painful. But I'm just wondering why you mentioned the councils in the Waikato area. That's concentrating the risk there. Yes, you might not lose all the assets at once, but you've got a greater chance of it than if you diffuse them over the country. And you mentioned other councils in this region. I wondered if in this region is an appropriate collective to be thinking about.
Through you, Bruce, it's a very valid question, and you do have to be careful about who is within the group. I can give you an example. I mean, the Waikato, to just step back a bit, the Waikato from a natural disaster point of view is relatively benign. So it still has an exposure from the earthquake and the like, but it is relatively benign. There is also a group in the Manawatu Wanganui. That does not include Palmerston North City Council, and there is a reason for that. PNCC would skew the numbers so dramatically that it wouldn't necessarily be of benefit to the other members within the group when it comes to a rating point of view. So we do have to be careful around the makeup, and it is different through different geographies and different exposures. But the point probably that I didn't explain very well is if we get those limits set right, and those limits again are a scientific process to understand what the maximum loss would be in the geographic region that's collected. if we get those limits right, the premium that is charged would be less per cent than if you were to go to the insurance market on your own, because insurers have, especially at the moment, there are some minimum premium levels. So if you're replicating that same minimum premium level for half a dozen councils, if you did one program or one placement for half a dozen councils, you remove that minimum premium issue from the insurers because they're collecting sufficient premium pool. So that, therefore, when the allocations are done of premiums to those member councils, does effectively reduce the rate per council. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it wasn't really a question, it was just an observation. You wouldn't want to be
Okay.
too much bigger, much smaller, or highly concentrated re-risk with your colleagues in the collective. So, yep, I'm happy with that. It's a
Yeah. And I think if I picked Matthew up correctly, because it sounds like, John, we are going to do a program with Aon to look at both the structured versus the strategic versus the transactional, and I presume the collective. What is that? Is that at Canterbury Mayoral Forum level? Is it, or is it? What's that? Yes, I've got John, I've got Bede, and I've got Trudy. One might be speaking for all. I don't know.
Yeah, it's through the Canterbury Corporate Forum, which is one of the forums and one of the working groups there.
Yeah. So, well, I think actually that Matthew has been careful enough to say you need to think it through. So, perhaps your points were made, Janice, and I suspect Matthew knows that well, and that needs to be thought through. Who do we pony up to in terms of our collective, and how does that happen? Thanks for that, Janice. Are there any other questions for Matthew at this stage, or John? Yes.
I would just make an observation that every board I'm involved with is moving to the strategic rather than the transactional, and it does involve quite a bit of work, a greater understanding of your assets and your risks, etc. But it is significantly worthwhile.
Agreed, and I think I could endorse that too, given, I have to be careful, it's with Matthew as well, but I've seen that elsewhere as well, even if it is the Waikato, Janice, it seems to have helped, so there we go. Okay, folk. Matthew, I must confess, I think we've probably spent the time we can, but I think that's valuable. John, I just want to be clear, we're now on a process of addressing these two issues with Matthew and obviously some of our colleagues around Canterbury, correct?
So with the strategic approach, the next step is to sit down with Aon and create a roadmap that we can bring back to this committee to show the steps we're going to take from the strategic approach, and then each step is going to be complete and that type of thing. For the collective, as my understanding, it's through that forum group that's going to be addressed. Okay. But definitely for this strategic approach, that's working with Aon, setting up a meeting, laying out the boundaries, the scope of work, and then taking it.
Right, okay. So you'll presumably can come, well, now that we've moved it to October, you can come back to us in October with a plan with Matthew to how we'll implement it.
That's the intent, to sit down there and create the roadmap moving forward to bring back to the October meeting.
Brilliant, that's great. Well, Matthew, thank you for that this morning. That's really handy, and obviously there's a good challenge there for us to pick up the pace. So going right back to the original premise here, we are in place with our insurance for the 1 July year, as you said, Jason. We're past that, so we're getting the briefing now about how we look and take this one forward. Okay, look, I'm just going to move from the chair that we receive the report, including thank you to Matthew and Aon for their presentation. Over a seconder, please. Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate that. It's been good to meet you again this morning.
Thank you for the time.
No worries.
Bye-bye.
Right, if I could move to item... and welcome, Trudy. Welcome, Timaru. Bit cheeky. Right, 6.6, mate. We're in your hands.
6.5.
6.5? Oh, gee whiz. You're right. 6.5.
So David Seif was originally meant to be here at 11. I've just spoke to him. He is here.
Oh,
So
okay.
he was coming in at 10, so he should be a minute or so away. I'm happy to start off this one. Kathy, he's downstairs in meeting room 1, in one of the... I'll show you, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
how you want to proceed.
Sorry? Oh, okay, rightio. Can we, is there something else we can, oh, actually, they're all reasonable sized papers, aren't they? Is there anything here that we could deal with while we're waiting on David? No, there's not really, is there?
You could move on to strategic risk, and we'll just
It's a
come back.
reasonably short paper, isn't it? So we could perhaps deal with strategic risk, John. That would be a good idea. That's item 6.8. Thank you. Now we'll make it fill the rest of the day because actually it's only 2 pages, but it's quite critical. John, if you give us any thoughts you'd like to raise, that'd be great.
So, as reported at the last meeting, we've completed the strategic risk profiling with all the respective group managers, and we've just completed our first quarterly review, 3-month review, with each of the strategic risks. As highlighted in there, there's only one strategic risk that's really moved from one risk assessment area to another, and that's around personnel, and it's highlighted on the map there, where it went from very high down to high. As an explanation as to why that occurred, is around the survey had been completed, so that went from partial to effective, and that essentially moved the risk rating from very high to high. With that. So it was quite a clean review. There were some effectiveness ratings went from 40 to 60% or 50 to 70, but it didn't have an overall impact on moving it from a residual rating from one level to another. There's expected to be more movement in the next quarterly review around some of these risks, but as asked for at the last meeting, and hopefully it's quite readable this time, I've blown up the bubbles. So you can read it a bit more, and there's ratings on the side. There you see where it sits from inherent to residual, so I hope it's a lot more clearer compared to the last presentation. That's basically
No, it's
the
good.
update.
No,
on
thank
that.
you, John. So, questions of clarification or comments for John? Yep, Janice.
Yeah, okay. Just a concern that despite the mitigants, we still have very high residual risks for climate change and the natural and built environment. If the mitigants were all fully effective, what would the situation be?
Basically, hold on, sorry, my apology. Button. Yeah, I'll bring it down to the back line. As I said at last meeting, climate change will probably sit here for 2 to 3 years because the tail on some of these mitigations need to be put in place is a long time. The urban built environment, we had discussions around that with Andrew and Paul, and it's expected within 6 to 12 months they'll move to, just based on the mitigations that sit there, because some of it is actually dictated by I always get this terminology mixed up, Andrew, around the urban, that unitary plan there's a plan out there that hinders your capacity to build.
Yeah, that's was high productivity land at the moment is restricting our growth areas, and it is a challenge there. But we also are doing development area plans for future growth areas, and that process is just kicking off now. So that'll be a very important tool to reduce the risk.
Just in terms of the risk table, some organisations have the inherent risk rating, then they have the residual, which is if things are fully mitigated, and then there's the current. So you can sort of see where you're intending to go and where you currently are. I'm taking that this residual risk rating is the actual current residual risk. Yeah, cool, thank you.
Another way you could present that, you could present it by a tornado map, where you say we are inheritors, we're counselling residually, and where your target is, which goes tomorrow. You see what I'm talking about. So that's no way of presenting it. It's just how complex you want to get with the presentation.
I think the important thing is that we're on track and we're monitoring them, and let's not get hung up on the complexity.
Actually, I'd beg to differ just a tad. I would like to know what our risk appetite is for these, which probably is our target rating. Because quite frankly, if these are our big risks and we are above our target, that's where our resources should be going. So I don't have a strong sense about what our priorities are here. It's a very good and efficient report, but we're missing, and I've just put a little rectangle. I'm putting a rectangle which is against the column on the right-hand side there, which would be risk appetite or target, whatever you want to call it, doesn't worry me. But we have done the work with Andrew, unless we're going to say it's out of date. We have done the work with Andrew on what is our risk appetite. We should be matching these, because these are our big risks. And it should be driving our response as an organisation. If climate change really is our big risk and we're above target, we actually should be focused on actually what are we doing to move residual risk to target. Now, in this case, I agree with you, John, it's probably going to be over some time, and we probably are going to sit above our risk appetite. But I want to know what is the plan to get us there. And that's what I'm missing here, so that when I look at, say, that middle box, it's all possible, and if it happens, it's major. My assumption is that's actually above our risk appetite. But there's a lot of our key risks, I would argue, are probably above our risk appetite. And I don't know whether we corporately, I'm not just looking at you, John, whether we corporately have got the right focus on our major risks. That's what I'm trying to, because there's nothing here to give me that answer. That's really what I'm after. Pete, I think you want to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Does because that workshop, or where we settled, was pre the election, so there's a number of new councillors, and so I think given that we're going into a long-term plan and we've probably got better visibility over our strategic risks, the mitigants, where they sit, I do wonder whether we revisit that work in time for it to actually be reflected into how the council and the community wish to have that discussion with the community, because some of these will be dependent on how much do they want to pay in order to mitigate that risk to a particular level, if you like, or where they want it to sit. So it might be timely to revisit that work, and I think we can build on what was done it was in August last year.
Oh, look, Bea, thank you for that, and thank you for, I had wondered when I'd said to Scotty we'd done our risk appetite statements, whether in fact that was pre or post the election. So if you look to be dumbfounded, Scotty, I don't blame you, because you weren't part of that process. So the answer would be yes, Pete. I mean, we should probably get into our annual life cycle as a committee. I'm used to, and most committees, it probably takes an hour or two as a workshop just before a meeting or something, just to go through, are these risk appetites right? I think that would be a good idea. I must confess your point's also made well around the LTP, that's why we should revise the strategic risks annually. But in this case, it becomes important when you've got your LTP settled next year that indeed we check that these strategic risks do relate to achievement of your LTP, because that will be important as well. So that's a really important point. Okay, so that's super cool. John, and I would open this to all management, including you, Bede. Essentially, having said, as always, John, there's more information I'd love to see, but let's not get too worried about that. Are we broadly comfortable with these settings in terms of our journey as a council? That's a big question, but I wonder if somebody could give me an answer on that. Are we happy with where we're at the moment, or rather, is it under control? Are we happy we're going in the right direction?
From where I sit, I'd say yes, we are. There's a lot of work to be done. It's recognised by having the meetings with the group managers. Like anything, you look at What we have done is that for those mitigations that are still ineffective or not, or partially, we have rated them into preventative administrative recovery. So that gives the group managers more direction on the preventative mitigations they should focus on, as opposed to recovery, which happens after the event. So I believe, given the short time that we started this whole new journey since December last year, we're progressing maturity-wise very well.
Thank you for that, John. Yes, Michelle.
Just one other question. Can we have a bit of a description of what you mean with the titles? Because if I sat here and went natural and built environment, what is the risk around that? I'd probably come up with a different answer to Scott.
Okay, fine.
It might actually be, I mean, I'm all for trying to be efficient with it. It may well be that on the second page, under each of the titles, you could just put that descriptor.
That's easily achieved.
I do like trying to be summarised, but we can be too summarised. So we've got a couple of things there. One, which is actually what is our target risk or what's our risk appetite. And look, one of the other ways, if I can give you a hint, which is really my question, are we happy, is often people put arrows up or down with a risk. In other words, which way is it trending? Even though it might be, how shall I put it, I mean, you've done that with R5, I agree, but it may even be with your schedule on the second page of the report. Do we have an arrow indicating whether it's going up or going down, or sometimes people would even put a straight line where it's going. Some people put velocity, whatever. Okay, well, look, that's useful. Thank you for that, John. I think the other thing that we've noted is that it is timely be for a risk appetite update. So do you want us to resolve that as well in your sense of getting that into the process?
That would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, so look, in terms of the recommendations, we'll note and receive the report, and the second resolution is that we ask management to seek a risk appetite update by way of workshop, because actually it's a committee responsibility to recommend to council what our risk appetite settings are. So it's a workshop for us. I'll move that from the chair to a seconder. Thank you, Peter. Any discussions on the motion? Being none, I'll put it all those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right. So we can return now back to item 6.5. Welcome, David. Good to have you here, and appreciate all the hard yards, which is evidenced by Jason's papers. So we'll go to 6.5. Jason, if you could lead off, and I suspect you're going to give the floor to David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So joining us today, David Seith, Risk and Advisory Partner at Deloitte. So I'll let David introduce himself properly when we get to him. I just wanted to quickly cover off the cover report. So this is really to focus on our 22-23 internal audit program, as well as, I guess, present the draft 3-year audit program. We have had some good news, and certainly Trudy is very happy to announce that we've got a risk and assurance manager that we've managed to recruit. He starts on the 24th of July, so not too far away. I've worked with him at Christchurch City Council before. He moved to a council in the North Island, so he's got good skills in this space, so we're really looking forward to him joining us. The key things I'd like to focus on, as the committee had requested previously, in terms of paragraph 6, I've got the internal audits that have been completed over the last couple of years. So not going to go through it, but just sort of talked about the title, the date, and the scope of the review. So those ones have been completed, and anything outstanding for those appears on the outstanding recommendations register as well. In terms of the status of the 22-23 audits, paragraph 8 talks to those ones. Most of these have been picked up, as David will talk to in a minute, in terms of the 3-year audit program. So the items which are still in progress, we're picking up there. Just like to flag that under attachment 1, we've attached the capital spend project management draft terms of reference, which the committee was keen to see progressed. You'll note that it is in the 3-year program that Deloitte will kick off on. And there was a report back on the onboarding and the induction process as well. We had closed it out last Audit and Risk Committee, but there was no report back in terms of progress on that, so that's just a 1 or 2 pager that I've added in. And really just want to hand over to David now in terms of the 3-year program. Jessica, I think you've got a couple of slides that David was keen to...
Can we perhaps ask questions
We can
about
ask
the
questions.
capital projects and the onboard induction before we get into the
Yep.
into the plan? Just in the capital projects review, the terms of reference, is it intended that they will also review the closeout process for each project and what went well and what didn't, so that we capture all those learnings, both good and bad? Because it's not just how it's monitored, but it's how it's closed out.
No, that's a good question. If it's not in the scope, we can add that
Yeah.
into the scope.
And just in the onboard induction, wondered how success is being measured, because there are some graphs there, but they don't show the percentages of each unit that's there. And I wondered if there was a feedback questionnaire loop around those attending how they felt about it. And I did note that that included health, safety and wellness, and some of the later things around health and safety don't refer to wellness at all, so that's just an observation.
Okay. In the absence of Eric, I will come back to you with the feedback.
Oh,
loop
you
of
don't
that
need
one.
to
Yeah.
don't need to come back.
For
It's
my
just
own interest, yeah. I will.
yeah.
That's right.
Jason, one of the other things when I was reading the capital projects review was a paragraph I didn't quite understand what it meant, and it's probably me. If you look at the 5th bullet point on what the review will cover, which is that bullet point clearly defined change management approval processes, including where appropriate the definition and application of tolerance levels of such changes and deviations from the plan. Can you just explain to me a bit more what that means?
It's a good question. I'd have to think about it a bit more. I think one of the issues when we do capital programs, I guess, is when they change from budget, and so I guess it's that tolerance around how then do we have to seek approval for some of those. I'm not quite sure about the change management aspect around that, so I can come back to you. Again, these are draft, so we'll work with Deloitte around what the exact things we are in the work program to test these things. So I can certainly do some more thinking around that one, as well as the closeout process that Janice has talked about.
I was reasonably comfortable that there were some good concepts in it, and you've helped a bit. I just wonder whether there could be a bit more clarity about what they are. I mean, change management, I went down the line of thinking often with an upgrade or a new building, we're going to have to think about different ways in which staff use it. You know, is it going to require us to be more efficient? Does it mean a new service? All that sort of stuff. In other words, it's not just about the build, it's actually about can we optimise its use. So I thought that was what it was about, but then you've raised good points about what's our tolerance, particularly around financial cost as we face changes. So I just wondered, either we're mixing a couple of things there or just needs to be clarified a wee bit. One of the other things under the objective and scope, which I think, Janice, in lots of ways you have partly touched on, which is the closeout. I was wondering whether one of our objectives and scope points would be assurance that we monitor these appropriate at PSG, SLT, council level. And I would have thought that would have been a valuable part to it, which I didn't quite pick up in terms of our objectives and scope. Sincere apologies, but I just think it would be useful, and I'd just advise that as we take that on.
Yep. No, we can add that in.
Brilliant. Any other questions on those two before we move to the 3-year plan? No? Okay, can we move to the 3-year plan? Thanks, David.
Morning, Chair. Morning, committee members and members of management. I know you've got a full schedule, so I've also heard, I think I must have attended at least 100 audit and risk committees, and this might be the first one ever running ahead of schedule, so congratulations for that.
Are you talking about mine, or are you talking about others as well?
I'll take the report as read, and I've got a slide that's got the proposed programme up that we can talk through, but just some some highlights from both from the work that we picked up through the work that we did. Firstly, really good engagement from everybody that we spoke to, both from management and the external parties. We've got a really clear sense that everyone we spoke to can see the value that a really robust, risk-based internal audit plan, internal audit program can bring. In terms of arriving at the plan, I would emphasise that it is proposed. Part of the purposes of today is for us to take questions on what we have proposed over the 3 years and to answer any questions that arise. Considered a number of sources of information in developing the PROS plan. Obviously, the interviews that we've had with stakeholders, the documentation that we were provided with in terms of the strategic and operational heat maps and the risk registers, the previous internal audits that have been done, bringing our experience from having run these sorts of programs with very similar sized territorial authorities. I'll just hopefully get the slide up that absolutely nobody can read, so hopefully you've got it in your hard copy documents as well. It has resulted in some material changes from the original one. We feel it represents a good balance of getting assurance over those key systems and controls at the councils, things like asset management, contract management, legislative compliance. We've got a really topical issue in there for next year, for 23-24, being that waste management contract and the billing process. And then we've tried to introduce some engagements that you potentially wouldn't automatically consider be part of an internal audit program. I'm looking specifically at that employee recruitment and retention and recruitment review, noting that it is a key risk for council and there is some value that we can bring in terms of getting the right specialists involved to come and review a process like that and hopefully give you some advice on how things can be improved. A couple of final comments before we take questions. The rationale for the engagements that we've chosen is included in the plan. It is ambitious in terms of the number of engagements. I know a number of those year one engagements are already work in progress, but for a council of your size and scale, getting through 6 engagements in 24-25 is ambitious. That's not to say it's not impossible, but I think it is something just to be conscious of for a couple of reasons. One is the impact on staff in terms of the time spent with the audits, and the second one is just to make sure that a lot of the important work starts after the internal audit reports have been tabled and finalised, because that's when you start dealing with the recommendations. It's one of the first things that I do with new clients going in when we're running internal audit programs. The first thing I'll ask is show me your list of outstanding recommendations, because that's a sign of how well the program's functioning. So you don't want to overload management with heaps and heaps of recommendations that they then feel as though they're under pressure to deal with, or they're coming up against timelines. So that, I suppose, it's just a sense of the importance of being flexible, and a 3-year plan. 3 years is an awfully long time in this environment that we're in, where things are changing very quickly. There will be a need to think, well, actually, this has popped up on the risk register, or this has increased in risk, or to Bruce's point, we've got something that's trending upwards here. Could we do with some assurance over that? That was all I wanted to say in terms of the introductory remarks. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. So, a very detailed, a comprehensive report, although simply written about what we propose to do. Any questions or comments from committee members? Got a couple, David, just to look. Firstly, overall, I'm comfortable with the plan. I guess the question of achievability really is probably more a question for you, Jason. Have we got the budget to do 6 in 1 year?
It's a mix of delivery by Deloitte and in-house. So one of the first tasks that the new risk and assurance manager will recruit is it's an internal audit position. So a number of these positions will be undertaken internally with the external resource. So, look, I feel reasonably confident that we can deliver between those two delivery mechanisms.
Great, that's music to my ears then. So look, then just a couple of questions from me about the about it. And David, it may be you, it could be with our new risk manager, Jason. But I am interested from our committee's development and understanding perspective. Actually, your introductory comments here, which was to remind us that internal audit is only one source of assurance. And so the idea actually of what is an assurance plan, as in contrast to what is an internal audit plan, is not a bad idea. What is it that we as governors can take on board as giving us assurance across the plethora of things that we do is something that's worth exploring. Clearly, internal audit's one of those key things, but I just would like to note that that would be useful. It's probably as much a point to me, Jason, somebody on the track, it would be worth picking it up. In terms of the program and plan that's in front of us, I'm generally comfortable with it, including your last point made about following up and the fact that number 18 is actually a follow-up review and after 3 years. I think that would be good. I think it's more than just recommendations, David. I think it's actually have we followed it up and are we more effective and enhanced in terms of our performance in that area would be really good. Can I just check with, going down my list, F, which is legislative compliance and integrity review. We have comply with in place, so where does that sit with the legislative compliance angle of that review? So we have a program in place now to give us a level of assurance over our legislative compliance. So where does the internal audit fit within it? That we just apply and comply with appropriately? Or does it got more of a focus around the integrity framework? That's F.
I think there's two elements to this. One is the we're not going to be doing a substantive piece of work checking that you're complying with every single piece of legislation. It's more about the processes and controls you've got in place to making sure that you are complying with those legislation. And maybe it's a small piece of work because comply with will be working really well. And then the second piece is that integrity framework piece, which is coming off the back of that recently announced framework around integrity. So I suppose it will come down to where the most amount of effort is spent.
Thanks, David. And I assumed it was the latter. Sorry, can we ask? I mean, I don't want us to. I'm very comfortable if there is a sense to which we should be careful about whether we're using comply with appropriately. But we do have a probably what within the sector is seen as the tool to manage our legislative compliance with. I just would wonder what we would be doing in there that would add to that other than ensuring we do it. But if it was the integrity review, which isn't, I suppose it is legislative compliance, but in another sense is a different item, I don't have any trouble with that. Okay, so it's really what's the balance in there, which is fine. Can I just check with M, which is the resource and building consent process? Where does IAN's reviews of the building consent authorities fit within this? And also MB are doing broader reviews at this stage. But I think probably my first question is really the key one. Where does the IANs fit within our building consent process and this proposed internal audit? Yeah, Trudy.
From my previous life, I can answer this question through you, Mr. Chair. So IANS is looking at the quality and assurance of the consents issued. This would be, in my perspective, looking at how we bill, how are we making sure that we issue consents correctly, and also in terms of how do we follow up if we have had to issue an abatement notice, for example, and how that is all dealt with, rather than the IANS side of it. So that's where I see it sitting. IANS will continue to function on that quality of and matching what is set out in the Building Act 2004.
And of course this extends to resource consents as well, which is broader. Yeah, as I said, I think MB are doing work in that area as well, Trudy, which I'm not, obviously, I don't know that that's necessarily an ongoing program, but one or two councils I've been involved with have had that look. I hear your point about particularly the enforcement end or the the enforcement end, I think actually is timely. So in that sense, very happy with it. So you'll fit it around that. If that's the case, that's wonderful. So look, that's super cool. That's got my questions done, David.
If I could just come back to your point, Bruce, about, sorry, Bruce, Mr. Chair.
Nah, call me Bruce. I'd rather you did that, Dave.
All right. I think one of the really useful things that maybe the new risk and assurance manager could do would be to produce an assurance map.
I
So
agree.
that you are looking,
Yeah.
you'll get a one page and it will start asking these questions on IANS, comply with, and it will give you a really clear view of all the sources of assurance, because there are many.
That's right.
I think that would be a really interesting first step for the new risk and assurance managers, to get them across the operations of the council, and it gives you it's a really neat way of seeing where the gaps are and potentially where we might be doubling up, and so we can free up some resource in order to look at other things.
Great. That's what I'd be interested in.
A couple of comments. One was the IT cyber security. Is that something that Deloitte can do, or is it something that's more technical?
We do have a team of about 80 people that just do that sort of work, yes. So, yep.
And I was, the asset management just noted here under E or 5 or whichever. I was interested in what the scope might be and what the output might be. Is it an asset maturity rating that would come out? What is anticipated there in terms of auditing asset management?
So our terms of reference would set out a series of agreed control objectives in terms of asset management, and then we would score each of those control objectives on is it very ineffective through to best practice. So it would be based on the control objectives that we would agree with management. I know there are asset management specialists that do those asset management maturity type reviews. It wouldn't be in that format, but it would be based on a series of agreed control objectives that we would then give you a score on.
And the infrastructure underground infrastructure is not included there. I was just interested in how the asset management and the infrastructure renewals, what the relationship between those two internal audits might be.
That's a good question.
You don't need to answer it. It'll come out in the scope. But it just, and one question, David and Bruce referred to it. The prior audits that have been done, did you consider the follow-ups required when you were putting this plan together? Whether there were any that
In terms of
whether there were any processes that should have improved, and we need to audit those.
we didn't have a look at the extent to which any recommendations that had been made on previous audit reports had been addressed. So we looked at the topics that were covered, but we didn't go as far as saying, have those recommendations been addressed?
I just have a question about the timing of the employee recruitment and review, given that nearly every single meeting since I've joined council we talk about being under-resourced, and whether that should be brought forward, or is there a reason why we've pushed that out a year?
Thank you. Good question.
Yeah, like I say, this is a proposed plan, and we can't do everything. And I'm very happy to have a conversation about moving things around.
Without putting the onus on you, Michelle, what would you move out? If we were to bring it forward a year, what would you
That's
push
what I
out?
was-
That's something what David's very politely saying to us.
I was thinking about that too, and I'm not sure about the asset management and the cyber security. I don't know enough about that, but it does worry me that that is one of our highest risks as the employee, and we're not dealing with that first.
Can we just leave that as a think piece for you, please, Jason, just to work through. I take your point, Michelle, very good. It's one of our top risks, although I noticed that we've made a small change downwards in its risk in the course of this quarter, which is good, but it's an absolutely fair point. So if I could if you could take it as a committee matter to think about, that would be really useful. Thanks for that, Michelle. Any other thoughts, questions from folk? Well, that's great. Only other comment I'd like to make, Jason, it occurred to me as I was reviewing this paper, and particularly with Trudy, your engagement of a new risk and assurance manager. I can't recall having seen, or possibly have, so I stand to be corrected, but I think it would be a good time for us to review the internal audit charter. I base this actually on a sense that, just as I perhaps have argued an insurance plan would be quite good elsewhere, and I stress not here in Timaru, there is sometimes within the committee a wee bit of misunderstanding about actually where the internal auditor effectively sits inside an organisation, and their role, their quasi-independence, and their importance to particularly us. Because once we get that internal auditor on board, I'd expect to have some committee-only time with that person directly as well. So if we could just add that, sorry, I know I'm making more work and our agendas are going longer, but if we could have an update on the internal audit charter, I think that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Right. So that be, I've got to put that action point down as a resolution, do I?
It helps, Mr. Chair.
So if we go with it, we receive a note, we endorse the 3-year plan, but ask management to take into account our general comments. And our third one is that we, at an appropriate time, review or receive we will review the internal audit charter, please. That'd be great. Any debate on that motion, because I'm going to move it. I've got a seconder, have I? I've got a seconder, please. Thank you, Janice. Is there any debate on those motions? We're happy? We know where we're going? Great. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. That's great. Fraud and corruption gap analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is really to update the committee on work that the team have undertaken with respect to the fraud and corruption gap analysis report that Deloitte completed last year and was reported through to this committee in September 22. So we were making pretty slow progress in this area due to resourcing, so we brought Deloitte in to sort of help speed us up. The gap analysis, from my perspective, was really good, and it highlighted four key areas that we needed to sort of focus on in this organisation. And even though they're listed in item 5 or paragraph 5, I do just want to touch on them. That we do complete a fraud and corruption risk assessment, that we do develop an organisation-wide sort of fraud and corruption training program, that we do have a look at some analytics around some detection of fraud risk, and that we have a look at a fraud control plan and the policy as well. So in terms of updates, before David just sort of touches on this, David has led 3 sessions back on the 19th of June in terms of fraud and corruption awareness training, and you've got one at 1 p.m. today, and the training's been so successful that the one today, I think we're trying to find a bigger room because there's so many people want to go to it. So,
and does that training extend to councillors?
The question was asked at the time, and we don't have an answer for that just at the moment,
Okay.
but we can certainly ask that question. At this stage, it was anyone who was in a leadership role, so GMs, unit managers, team leaders, anyone in the finance team, and anyone in sort of engagement and culture team as well. Deloitte have undertaken some work on some fraud-focused detection and analysis, and back on 14 June, the team presented to B, Trudy and myself some of the initial findings. We focused on related parties and accounts payable, something like 57,000 transactions that we sort of, and I'll let David talk to in more detail, put it through sort of a bit of a complicator, and it really does highlight where there are related parties that we didn't quite know existed. We're looking at supplier bank accounts, staff bank accounts, we're looking at staff who may have the same bank accounts as another staff member and stuff like that. So we're just really aware of anything that we need to be aware of as management, and we're still working through those.
And just on that, Jason,
Yep.
that will feed into the accounts payable controls internal audit?
Some of that will, yes, because it's quite a key aspect of it. So, yeah. And then, even though it's a separate agenda item, which is the next one on the fraud and corruption control plan and the policy, I have just highlighted that they were part of the work that Deloitte was undertaking as well. So happy to hand over to David to give an update, and I think you had some more slides as well.
There's just one more slide. If we can, I feel like Taylor Swift, getting a bigger room for my presentation. It's good.
I will be finished so early here. You can use this room, David. Don't worry.
Oh, I need to do that. So this is the only other slide I wanted to show. It's the result of the gap analysis, and it's just a really neat way of showing where the strengths are in how an organisation addresses fraud and corruption risk, and where those areas for improvement are. And I think it's really timely that council's going through this, and it's one of the things that I'll mention in my presentation this afternoon, is that I sense there's a whole bunch of factors that are resulting in an increased risk of fraud and corruption in terms of the cost of living crisis and interest rates and people coming under more pressure, new ways of working, new technology, COVID, and it's certainly being borne out with the number of times I'm picking up the phone wearing my fraud investigator hat. So I think it's, commend council, A, on doing the gap analysis exercise, and B, on addressing 3 of those 4 high priority items that we set out, being the training, the analytics, and the review of the policy. I think the good news is obviously people have engaged with the training, and the whole point of that training is that council employees are the council's best fraud detection and prevention resource. They're the eyes and ears of your organisation. 2/3 of the cases we investigate here in New Zealand, it's an employee who's raised their hand to say there's something going on here that doesn't sit well with me. And so it's so important that you arm them with knowledge, but more importantly, the confidence to speak up, knowing that they're working for an organisation that will take their concerns seriously, will investigate them properly, will protect their anonymity if required, they won't face any repercussions. That kind of culture is so important, and so that's what the training does. The analytics is much more kind of a bottom-up piece of work, looking in great detail at transactions and at data, and I think it's encouraging. There's always really interesting, and management's still working through it, but prima facie, there was nothing in there that made us think there's anything really nasty going on. There's some interesting relationships I think the management wasn't aware about, and there's some interesting kind of transactional patterns, but nothing in there that would give us any real cause for concern. And then the third piece, which is that review of the policy and the fraud control plan, just really gives you some really good foundational documents that are there for all staff, that are leading practice, and that will cover all your bases in this area. And so, from in that document, just doing those three pieces of work is pushing those green sections out across at least 3 of those 4 quadrants and getting you up to that level of expected practice.
Thanks for that, David. Any comments or questions folk would like to raise? So this is really about work that's been done or is being done, which is really good, in my view. Any comments from folk at this stage? No? Look, I can only put a big uptick on all of that stuff, David and Jason. I think it's actually really important. Can I be honest, as an independent chair, it always worries me a wee bit about something that we know is always a risk, but equally it's a bit hard to put your hand on unless you do the sort of work that Timaru's doing. So I'm very comfortable that we actually are doing it. And it'll certainly make life easier for us when we come to our external audit and have to sign off that we are implementing appropriate forward policies and plans, and I'm jumping one paper ahead of myself into play. So I actually just want to say thank you for the work to date. This is really important. Let's take a small give here, B. When David says, well, you've got to work through the analytics, but actually there's nothing there at this stage prima facie, I think it was the way you put it, first flush, that would worry us. That's good, because I have, to be honest, engaged David before in positions where in fact I wanted to do it because I had been worried. So it's a good sign, mate.
I'll just pass a comment, Mr. Chair, that Trudy, Jason and David will know as soon as it was done, is there anything that I need to know? Is there any, it was about 4:45 on a Friday night, and I said to Jason, I want to know before the weekend. So I too wanted to know exactly that. And while there is a bit for us to go and unpick, like you, it's something that literally keeps you awake at night, is the thought of something malfeasance going on inside the organisation.
Good, and I mean, other things start to come off that. What is our possibly out of this is what is our staff interest register like? Is it up to date? Do we monitor it? Do we understand how it could affect the payments? All those sorts of things. Yep. Pete?
Just on that, can I make a point that we are seeing some really responsible behaviour by officers who, for instance, have been given gifts, sometimes outside of the workplace, and they have brought it in and recorded it, and then it's been dealt with in terms of an appropriate practice policy, etc. So I think we should, and that's happening at all levels, so I think we should acknowledge that, and that's partly training and awareness as well. And I don't want to jinx anything, it's touch wood, an air, whatever, but it is heartening, and David's training is superb. To your point, Janice, I think the elected members, we should open it up, provide it, and invite them, because it is fascinating training and insights.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. I wanted to just endorse that we should open it up. I think this is one of those areas where, for elected members, it would be useful, Jason. So if I could ask you to work with Trudy to think through how that might be achieved and what the council program's like, I'll leave it in your hands. Okay, so the motion is that we receive a note. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thanks, Peter. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Scotty. Appreciate that. Any discussion on the motion? By the way, do I have to pass an additional motion that you'll have a... So you're actually adding the fact that you want one, okay? Rightio. So Jess, we're adding the fact that there'll be a... Well, because you're moving it, you want one as well. As you're taking it for the team, Peter.
Interesting thing you'll find that if you do find some form of fraud or corruption, finding a policeman to take the complaint and understand how to investigate it.
Well, I think actually, can I be honest, comment on that, Peter? I think I think the key is actually what we're going to do after morning tea, which is look at the fraud detection and prevention and detection policy, because actually we have to look after ourselves. Is my experience, and then working with the police, provide it to them. We are the controllers of our own destiny in this, rather than, oh, here's a fraud, Mr. Policeman, please look at it. And that's not even a crack at them, it's just the reality of resourcing. Yeah, okay. So with that, so it's now twofold. We ask management to arrange a briefing or one of David's great fraud awareness meetings for training for the councillors. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thanks a lot. Well, I'd like us to take a break now and come back at 5:15. I hope, Dave, you can join us for morning tea. I think we're going to go through to the lounge, and we'll take a break for a quarter of an hour. Thank you. Oh, we are. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you're not. Thank you for keeping me up to task, Janice. I do agree we need to keep ourselves going and crack on with our agenda. I'm up to fraud and corruption policy. Bronwyn, welcome. Nice to meet you. I understand you'll take us through this. We'll make some opening comments and perhaps David has some comments as well. Is that correct? Yeah, brilliant. In your hands anyway,
Thank you,
Bron.
Chair, and thank you, Committee. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Senior Policy Advisor. We're really pleased to provide this suite of work to the committee. Just want to generally break down a few points. One of them, while there's no legal requirement to have such a policy, it's quite prudent that we actually do have one because it sets a very clear tone to the community and to the ratepayers that fraud, corruption and bribery is something that Council takes very seriously. There are three main papers for you to look at today. The policy is a strategic document that gives rationale behind why Council is focusing in on fraud, bribery and corruption, and it also sets the zero tolerance that we have to these activities. The fraud, corruption and bribery procedures will go through what will occur if possible fraud, corruption or bribery is identified or is advised to a contact officer. The fraud, corruption and bribery plan outlines the key activities that are needed to carry out further understanding and mitigation of any fraud and corruption risks. As already stated here this morning, we are in a time of economic struggling, which does lead to possible increases in these activities. Anecdotally, I do want to say that the training that's being held currently about fraud, corruption and bribery has led to a number of officers actually having corridor conversations and alerting others about this kind of information. So we're very pleased with the work done. I just want to say a shout out to the team. No policy or procedure is ever written without a number of eyes looking across it, and we're very pleased as a team to find that Deloitte's review of our work led to very minimal changes. So we thank you for that, and I'll pass over to Dave.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bronwyn. No, I just wholeheartedly second everything that Bronwyn said in terms of these key foundational documents setting a real clear tone from the top and a real clear message, and just providing really clear guidance to all your staff on how fraud's defined, the fact you have a zero tolerance to it, and then really importantly within those procedures some pretty detailed steps on what to do, because we often find it's a really stressful time for people if they're worrying about a colleague or there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just not beginning to make sense. And so having a document that they can go to and making it really clear that they discharge their responsibility with one conversation or one phone call or one email, and then the organisation will take over is really important.
Really helpful. So we've got a suite of documents here and an impressive set, Bronwyn. So to be clear, we've got a policies, procedures and plan, which are designed to probably exactly implement what David has said. It's clear that we have no tolerance for fraud, corruption or bribery, and indeed there are processes you can raise your points. So do we have any comments on the suite of these? I'll take comments on any of those three rather than go through page by page. Michelle?
This is just a general comment about consistency throughout the policy, and sometimes we're reporting to the chair of the audit and risk and the chief executive, and sometimes the mayor's in there as well, and maybe I just needed to go back and have a second read of it to work out what the difference is. And in places we're talking about a group manager, and other times the same title as a general manager, but just, and I actually did wonder if we can, given how when we restructure we change people's titles, if we can make this document enduring somehow by not having specific titles or having, or whoever should replace them.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, Scotty.
Thank you very much. Really do like the look of the policy, and I think it doesn't just serve well to protect individuals, but gives some real perception of integrity and trust, which our community really they look to. So I think it's excellent. Just a couple of points on page 92, 7.10. The heading is all council officers and elected members, and then the point 7.10 says all council officers, including managers, are responsible for. I wonder if they're slotted in after all council officers, it should say and elected members, including managers, are responsible for, just to be consistent with the title. And on page 112, just with regards to securing evidence, I just want to test that a little bit. I know that you've had the professional advice, but also has legal advice been sought? Is there Bill of Rights implications, particularly with regards to accessing personal phones, etc., because normally that sort of thing requires a warrant or a production order. And is there something that sits behind this, for example, to ensure that any officers undertaking any sort of investigation do comply with the law as far as that sort of stuff is concerned, because a process can be jeopardised as well as them putting council at risk if they don't follow the law as far as securing evidence is concerned.
Thank you so much for that. We did actually have a senior SLT member review our documents and had noted that we needed to include during the procedures comments around the Bill of Rights, but also the terms of natural justice, which will allow that people who, obviously you're not going to start an investigation unless you're concerned that there is an issue, around ensuring that everything that is done is legal, so that there's either no evidence that can't be either admitted if it needs it, or a breach of anyone's personal information.
Presumably, Bronwyn, that will be covered in the training that all investigators will have to undergo. Because when I've been reading it, I was reading the policy and there was no reference to any of the investigators needing to be trained, and it took me I got down to the procedures before there was reference to all investigators have to be trained. But that training should cover off those sorts of issues?
It will, because we wouldn't have an investigator that wasn't fully trained, and the reason why we've put them into the procedures as a reminder so that any officer who is reading this knows that not only will the investigator be trained, but also remind them that they also have rights as a person who may be under investigation, and we don't wish to step upon those rights.
Yeah.
Councillor Shannon might have had some points, but I was just going to elaborate a little around what we do to address some of those issues around access, if you like, Mr. Chair. So in the employment agreement, of course, all of that property remains, if it's council-issued property, it remains council-issued property and we have rights over it. Where council pays for a phone account for somebody, then we normally get a disclosure that we are entitled in the event of an investigation or with appropriate evidence to go and do searching, and overlaying, or of course all of that are the usual rules of investigation or inquiry that sit in to where there may be prima facie allegations of fraud or corruption. And if it's serious enough and it's going out to an external party, and if you take, and David would say this, I think, back me up, the SFO, for instance, have zero tolerance for corruption or bribery. They, of course, have their own inquiry procedures which would sit over the top of all of this. So there's a number of protections, but there is a bit of a grey zone if somebody has used a personal device that they pay for themselves.
Thanks for that, Pete. It's helpful. Scott, do you have more questions, mate?
No, it's fairly well answered actually. It's just really with regards to a person's individual item within their car, their phones and what have you, and so long as within your procedures it's quite clear that those articles under the Search and Surveillance Act very, very difficult to access without a production order, ensuring that that's clear in in your training so that nobody makes any errors.
Yeah, through you again, Mr. Chair, that's quite correct. And you need to step through your steps very, very carefully, which is the reference to training. And normally you'd take legal advice along the way as well to ensure that everybody's rights, because of course the presumption of innocence sits with everybody until the point at which they are not, till they're found otherwise. So those processes around natural justice and so on are critical and are important. And I think what the policy and procedures and so on aim to do is to make it clear that they are preserved through in order to protect people's rights.
Thanks, Pete. Other questions? Janice, do you have some?
I was really pleased to see this suite of documents, and so I was sort of going, this is good. Even if it needs, over time, we'll revamp it and modernise it, perhaps. But a couple of questions. One on the policy. Is the appointment of friends, family, etc. captured there? Because it seems to be talking more about monetary assets rather than nepotism. So that's a question. You don't need to answer it now. It's just that's part of it. In the policy, what was page 94, I don't know if it's policy or procedures, it says fraud, bribery and corruption minimisation, which I wondered if that would be better if it was prevention, because down below it means to prevent or minimise fraud, because minimisation indicates some degree of tolerance. And I accept there is likely to be maybe some low-level stuff, but I don't want to be seen to be condoning it anywhere. And down on page 114, which is part of the plan, there are specific firms named, such as Deloitte, and I wonder if it should be more generic. Just remove the names. And that's as detailed as I got, because I was so pleased to see the improvement with having something.
Bronwyn, my position is, again, very similar to Janice's, very happy with this. When I'm looking at this from an end-to-end process, I'm looking at what in here, and it might be as much through David's training, encourages and makes safe a staff member to speak up. So there's obviously a relationship between this and whistleblowing, but actually in reality, for somebody to put their hand up under this policy and say, look, I don't know that this is right over here, it's almost like whistleblowing, and organisationally, behaviourally, can give rise to the same fear and concern. So my first concern is, are we comfortable that we have, it won't be necessarily in this policy, but we have and it could be through the training, that we have I suppose what I mean, the encouragement that if you have a concern, you can speak up, so that's the area where you come back to speak up campaigns, or, there's a whole range of different ways in which councils around the country and organisations are making it, and I overuse word safe, for a concern to be expressed and to be investigated. So the second thing that interests me is then, who do you actually talk to? And it goes back to the point, it needs to be clear. The one position that I wasn't entirely certain of here was the fraud control officer, and where that person sits in the organisation. Wait a sec, I'll get it all off my chest, and then you can come back and tell me, stop ranting, Bruce Bronwyn. So don't get too worried about this. So the critical thing to me is the position of that person. This is what also comes back to, you weren't here, Ron, when I talked about the internal audit charter. This person has to have a reasonably special place in the organisation where there can be confidence that a matter can be raised in that sort of speak up manner, and that actually it will be dealt with and treated appropriately. So I have to say, when I read through the related documents, I can't quite work out the status and role. Don't want to be hooked on status, but I think this is important of the Chief Fraud Officer, because I got to the bottom of it, and I think it's you, Andrea. It says it's the CFO. But then it says the Chief Fraud Officer's work will be governed by the Risk and Assurance Manager. And I don't quite get that. It doesn't seem to fit within even what I understand of the developing structure within the organisation. So I don't have trouble with the need of a Chief Fraud Officer, but you can see I'm trying to think specifically in the right sense of the words. How do we encourage? How do we make it safe? Who do they speak to? And that person has to have a level of quasi-independence in the organisation. And they have to have the status where they can talk directly to Bede, potentially to myself, clearly to the mayor. And I don't know if I've quite got that sense through the document that actually is there. The role of the fraud officer is well expressed under 6.1, I think, of the, is it 6.1? One of the set that might be the plans of the procedures, but it seems a wee bit contrary then to what I've seen inside the front end. And I would just like that, can I be honest, I'd like that rechecked, because I couldn't work it out when I was trying to go through it. Now, that sounds like a critique, probably is. David, you've written this, is that, or you have, Bronwyn, is there any comments or, you'd like to make top of your head off that?
Thank you so much, Chair. Sorry for interrupting before.
No, that's fine. I just said I had to get off my chest, so it's fine.
One of the great works about working with Dave is when his recommendations came back for me to review, I was able to put to SLT, and that's only happened like last week, about this person that you're talking about. So to have a protected disclosures contact officer, a fraud and corruption kind of contact officer, and it's been recommended by Bede and the SLT that it actually sits with the privacy officer, who currently at the moment is an officer who is perhaps seen as a bit more senior to other officers, but not part of the tier management scheme. Again, so that one person has that suite of understanding around what's privacy, what does protected disclosure mean, when to step in.
Good. Okay, so that does mean in terms SLT's thinking that's possibly developed more from what is the suite of documents they're actually running, because as I said, Andrea, from my reading of this, you're the fraud control officer, and I don't actually have trouble with that, but then I made some assumption the risk and assurance manager might actually even report to you. It seems odd then that they would be controlling you, and where does that sit within just the ecosystem of our place? Didn't quite mesh with me, albeit the role is well understood.
Bruce, I did wonder if I don't know what it's called, protected disclosures, probably rather than whistleblowing, if there could be some reference to disclosures made under this being equivalent or made under that, because we all must already have that in place. So whether there's a link between those might solve some of that concern. And it's great to protect the person making the disclosure, but we also have to protect the person being disclosed about until they're proven guilty.
David, in your great experience, mate, is any comment you'd like to make, particularly on the position of the fraud? I want to call him the fraud officer. What do we call them? Fraud control officer.
Yeah, I think we do need to just make sure that those lines of responsibility are really clear. I think obviously Bronwyn's done some work in appointing that person, but I think it needs to be reflected in here just to make it really obvious. Yeah. And I think the first point you raised about what in here encourages a staff member to speak up, it's quite difficult to do in a document. It's about the role that everyone plays in terms of creating that culture, that environment. Yeah.
David gets me to two questions. As you can see, broadly, the engine room of this procedure and policy, I'm, broadly comfortable with my one reservation over the position. So it's the bits that hang off the side. Now I have two of those, Bronwyn, and one is, what do we do internally in the area of Speak Up? If I can use that as a phrase for, how do we make it so? I mean, speaking up is the same in health and safety. How do we enable staff to say, stop? We have to stop work because it's unsafe. It's a big call, but again, it's an even bigger call if you want to say, well, actually, I think that person isn't doing the right thing. And the other thing, which is hopefully less dramatic, but is allied to this, is actually the staff interest register, which we refer to under I think it's under the plans. Is that all tickety-boo? Do we have an up-to-date staff register? I know it's reviewed every 6 months or annually, and we're checking people aren't in any way conflicted through their interests. Because I bet you there are a few, I don't mean this negatively, but inevitably in small communities, staff have a good range of other interests as well. That's all. That is all fine, because that's part of this process.
We're currently updating the staff interest register at the moment, so we do that for the annual report process. So it's the key SLT members, then some of your key staff around CFO and CIO and that sort of stuff. So categorically that's in place, which John Craig is leading through.
Great. Thank you. That's good. So what is our leave? Sorry, Fiona, over here, you're quite quiet. I don't want to leave you out of the loop, but is there anything you guys want to say?
I was just going to allude to the Protected Disclosures Act and the provisions that are in there, and who knows and understands of what qualifies that and what protections there are and things like that. But you mentioned that you have an officer specific to that, so you have a number of officers that you've lined up here.
I wouldn't say there's a number of officers. I would say a number of roles sit comfortably together.
Yeah, and that was my position, and coming from other a regional council, we have people that by virtue of their position within the organisation, trusted people who by virtue of where they sit in the organisation, that they're well known, mature in terms of their time in that environment, that people will know they can go to them about all sorts of things, including health and safety and whistleblowing, protected disclosures and things like that, and that there are regular meetings where some of those things are alluded to for staff and what have you.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate that. Right, I just wonder if going to the resolutions, I want to try and leave this so that you guys can just get on with it. So what I'd like to do is, I would suggest that we do endorse the suite of documents. What I would like as a second one is for you to report back on just those, any minor amendments that you've made. And I don't want to suggest, by the way, Janice, yours is a minor amendment, but there has been some tweaks there. Have you made those? And secondly, to report back on this broader, what are the peripheral bits, particularly the place, well, it's not peripheral, but the place of the Chief Fraud Officer and how that's going to work. And perhaps just some comments you might like to make on the Speak Up campaign. Oh, sorry, you don't have a campaign necessarily. How Speak Up, in my loose words, are used. Would that be okay, Ron, without making it too administratively burdensome?
Very happy to do that for you, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, I don't know whether you caught that, Jess, but if you can figure out the nice words that actually we're endorsing, but you'll come back with an update on the downstream action from this meeting, that would be really good. I'll move that soon. I'll put that amendment in there. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Peter. Any discussion on the motion? I'll put it then, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? I heard the right-hand side say aye. What are you guys doing over there? Look, we're going well. So we've done strategic risk management, so we're on to the operational risk management, John. So thank you, by the way, Ron. Appreciate your work. In your hands, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the last meeting, 8 further business units have completed their initial operational risk identification and assessment process. Since the writing of this paper, 3 additional business units have completed, that be strategy and corporate planning, 3 drainage and water, and libraries.
Thanks,
I
David.
couldn't report it on this one, but they were completed between the submission of this paper and today's meeting. So within the attachment, it's got the those business units that have completed with their summary table as were presented beforehand. I take on board about the feedback around the dashboards, for the strategic dashboards. I'll apply the same thought logic to the operational ones around descriptors and movement on the summary table. Also, 5 business units have completed their first quarterly review. They're listed there, and of that, Finance, Land Transport Unit and Emergency Management have their residual rating has moved from a higher level to a lower level, as explained in there. I must give an apology to my emergency management friend. I actually put it down as environmental management. It is emergency management, okay? Kindly pointed out this morning to me. Thanks, Phil. It's amazing how many eyes can look at it and no one can, your eyes see something different. But so it is, we haven't completed it all. There's only a few to go. It has been a challenging time between the last meeting in terms of COVID, another wave of COVID coming through, flu, and some other personal activities that have developed. But I'm pleased with how it's going and the feedback and engagement that's still there with all the business units, especially when it comes to operational risk reviews. Because of those, we've now gone into the stage of categorising those red and oranges into preventative, administrative, or recovery. And that gives them a form of an improvement plan moving forward of what needs to be done.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. It's been very enlightening. Scotty, I wonder whether you had any questions on this now that you asked a good point about operational reviews. Any questions you want to? I'll let you lead off if you had any, mate.
Funnily enough, my commentary was largely around what you asked with the first presentation of that.
Right, so do we have questions here, folk, for John over this? I have a few. Can I just rattle through them unless you folk have anything that's burning? Janice? Pete? Let me have a quick crack. And it's sort of, it's only in the order of just going through them, John. First one was Park and Rec. And one of our larger risks, still in the orange, was asset failure. Just, can you describe to me what is meant by asset failure in the Parks and Recs? Is it a swing would fall off and what have you? What would it be?
Also, parts of assets is like playgrounds.
Yeah, so it's your playground equipment would in some way fail.
So that says that the risk
Don't get too worried. I get it. I just was checking because I also then got to rec services and don't know what's the difference, but I figure that's the pools and what have you. It does give rise for me the health and safety lens through all of these, and none of them had health and safety. And I wondered, do we just default to the big health and safety risk, or at an operational level? What is the discussion that's going on about their portion, their lens of health and safety? Because I would have thought with a playground, as when I get to the pool, even when I get to the airport, which is our most controlled, highly de-risked activity. Andrew, I'm not having a crack at you. We don't, pardon? We don't, it's, oh yeah. Except for the waiting list to get through security, but anyway, that's another story. Sorry, in joke. How's health and safety being dealt with in these? Is a really good question, John. Sorry.
It's a very good question, Mr. Chair, and a conscious decision was made that this is around purely business operational risk, but we're applying the same lens, using the same process for health and safety. So 2 different disciplines, how we're looking at it with that, because you make a valid point, like with parks or even like Sea Bay, with pools and that type of thing, there'd be quite a big list if we added health and safety into this. So that's why we decided we'd do business operational risk and then health and safety risk. So we now have our high level critical safety risk.
Yep.
And then what's going to fall off that is the individual business unit health and safety risk registers that will be updated to this new risk framework
Right.
and go through exactly the same process.
Because when I got to environmental compliance, I thought about potentially lone workers or
Yes.
whatever being out.
Yeah.
There's a health and safety risk, and I didn't see it here. And yet, if I probably go to most councils, including our own, we'll have lone workers on it. Without trying to get into politics, why is the dog pound one of our highest risks? The simple answer, not the political answer, just the quick one. Have we got dogs running around? What's the story?
It's more to do with the nature of the pound itself, the
Right.
pound and its location to the waste plant and so forth. So that's why it's about ensuring that we are following, and please be jumping, it's following the rules around animal safety. There's guidelines on that.
Yeah.
So there's still a bit of work to go there to improving that area.
Right, okay. Yeah, so that's the way we operate it. And yes, you're quite right. It's an emotive area. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I said it seemed to be our highest risk. And community development, which interested me, has got the highest risk because everything's red. Why is community development our most riskiest activity?
So this is a new business unit, if I can say that. There's two people in that, and they have two quite clear directives, and that's the two operational business risks that are in there. And there's still quite a bit of work to go in that area. So it's recognising it's more the effectiveness of the mitigations.
It's about to start, yeah.
That's why it sits where
Brilliant.
it sits. Yes.
Good. Just don't worry, John, I'm just about there, so we'll keep it going. So look, my final...
Excuse me, just.
Sorry.
Chair,
Sorry,
sorry,
Andrew.
just note development includes climate change as well.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, great. That's good. We need to look into that. Actually, Andrew, now that you've spoken, land transport unit I looked at, there are some reds there too, but my presumption is that a lot of those issues are going to have to be picked up as part of the LTP. So that's district road safety and awareness, levels of service, etc. are red in terms of their residual score. So they're presumably a question of resourcing. No?
Yeah, lead level of service is going to definitely be addressed through the LTP. That is an ongoing issue. We're getting expectations beyond what we've provided. And of course, your road safety. Unfortunately, will probably always be up in that area because it's very hard to control. It's very much a behaviour thing rather than something you can fix.
So it gets me to my final question. I had worked out that environmental management was presumably meant to be emergency management, John. Look, a lot of going on in North Island, as you're well aware, and the Bush report in Auckland and what have you. So when I saw, for instance, EOC engagement and availability being, if I picked it up correctly, a reasonably significant risk, and I don't know whether I've interpreted that right, but actually it's just about our ability to even stand up an EOC.
Through the chair, welcome Phil Mackay, filling in for Paul Cooper, but major of emergency management. And yes, you're correct. There's ability to stand up the EOC as a facility and then the staff it.
Isn't that a worry? Why would I be sitting here sort of confident that we're okay then if we had an emergency tomorrow?
So we have got some mitigation. So we have got staff trained. It's the level of training and the sheer numbers of staff. Once again, reflecting on the North Island responses, the sheer number of staff we need will circumvent what we can deliver here locally. So it's that sense of realism, 2 to 3, 4 day response we can source ourselves. We go past that and we will be challenged, as most councils would be.
Agreed. So I guess I'm trying to think about, so what are the fallback plans if we go out to a week, 2 weeks?
So, and this is one of those mitigations as a Canterbury group, we have created a cohort of higher trained teams across Canterbury that will come and support us. And then we've also acknowledged the work that NEMA's doing with the NZ EMAT team, which is another source of surge staff. So what we're saying, we've still got it, but once again, we saw with Gabrielle, the sheer drain on local government and national and central government resources is still challenging for New Zealand to respond to that scale of event. And I think it's quite honest to say we haven't got that solution nationally, yet alone here locally.
Okay. I'm pretty average in my full knowledge of it. I know, I understand the core points you're making, Phil. I'm just trying to think how we're using this, and it's saying, it's highlighting something, and I think that's outside our target risk. And yet, you know, we're going to get a flood here. I mean, I've seen, Phil, some action here in the past. Was it the huts on the Opahi, and we declared an emergency state of emergency in time and got action, and I'm comfortable that what I've seen today is good. But if we had something that was more full scale, we're effectively, you know, if I was, you know, next week we have a flood, 2 weeks we had Mike Bush in here, and he says, oh, you guys knew that you couldn't stand it up. How big an issue is this for us, is really what I'm trying to say. How serious are we about this? Or is it just bred because generically we, you know, it's stated the condition?
So my understanding is that we're very serious about this, because I've had a lot of discussion with Phil about this, and I'm always asking him to keep me up to date with all the discussions, like, you know, have monthly meetings here and all that type of thing with the local response units, the defence, the police, and all that type of thing. So the valid point at the national level is that can New Zealand actually absorb the ongoing amount of natural hazard events that are occurring around New Zealand, and can we resource them? So let's say we had Auckland, East Coast and the West Coast of the South Island all go at once, which is a high possibility from a national hazard point of view. Could we adequately man them? It'd be at a push, to be fair, to deal with all three emergencies like that at once.
Yeah, look, I think all I'm trying to get to here, John, Phil, don't get me wrong, I'm not having a crack. I mean, in fact, if anything, I'm arguing for more resources if it really came down to it. I'm trying to work out, you know, I'm trying to live with our framework, which is operationally, so it bears with operational risk, but actually, if we can't staff an EOC or have an adequate response, it very quickly becomes a big risk, and it gets to governance in a very quick way. All I'm trying to reflect here is, and I mean, again, you know, it's the limitation of trying to be efficient in your reporting versus a full description about how the risk is managed. It just struck me that in looking at this, that actually perhaps a fuller description of the risk would be helpful. What you're really saying to me, Phil, is we don't have enough preventative controls in place to avoid the risk. Therefore, we have to have some mitigations in place. And so one of your mitigations you're saying to me is that actually we have an arrangement, and the other Canterbury councils will come screaming down the highway if they can get across the rivers to help us, or they'll fly. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be picky here, but I mean, that's essentially it. If that's as far as it goes and that's adequate in the circumstances, that's fine. To me, that's a red flag. Yeah.
It raises the question, and we discussed it briefly earlier, about when operational risks get escalated up. And when I was looking through these, you know, the dog pound's high and the EOC's high, and I was looking for a bit more explanation as to why the very high, for each of the very high risks, to understand whether they were, because I suspect if you prioritised each of the very high ones, some would actually be a really high priority and the others would be maybe not so high. Yeah. And I wonder if in future when that comes that might be helpful, but it's the escalation of those very high risks to this committee that is of concern. What is that process?
Correct. And to be honest, my intent, I feel like we've done that wrong, is actually touching off in my mind, I think it's the most risk that's come through from the operations. I want to be careful labelling it as the most risky, Phil, because I don't in that sense mean it. But what I'm trying to reflect here, if I'm thinking about an operational issue that collectively management's putting in front of me, and I think about our context, and if we are challenged to stand up our EOC, I think that's actually quite a significant risk in my view, and I'm happy to be disabused of that view. Perhaps I've been too affected by what I've experienced and seen in North Island. Peter, you've got a comment, mate.
So, I mean, we can't ever get out, based on those assumptions and where it's rated, we'll never get out of the very high. Is there an appetite for some scale around it to understand, you know, the first so many days or the scale of the EOC or something there, because there is, you know, I mean, that's a significant resource within the, you know, Canterbury region, to have those teams come down and relieve and add or augment those situations. That's big in itself. Because then you're going to a whole new scale based on central government's inability to cope with, say, an AF8 across a whole, you know, length and breadth of and I suppose some scale around that could help. I don't know.
So, Mr Chair, so one of the nuances of this framework is that the less mitigations that you have and they're not effective and they're partial or not, are rated higher. So if there's only 4 or 5 mitigations and they're partial, it'll go high, very high. If you've got 20 mitigations that are more effective than not, it'll bring it down. So that's one of the nuances of the framework.
Look, I think we can't solve it here. Sorry, can I be honest? Pete, you want me to? I was about to sum up and ask for a bit of action.
I'll thank you very briefly. I think part of what it is we're trying to elucidate here is, if you like, the opportunity cost of running the EOC, because we can do it, as Phil's pointed out, for a few days, but then we get into making sure, so we have to make sure the water runs, so we can't touch any of them. So then we're into areas like building control and resource consenting or finance, and if we have to go for a bit, all of their activities start to fall behind, and it's almost the opportunity cost of bringing these people in and staffing and running it for a period of time, and that might be, I think, what we're trying to do here. So that might feed into some of this discussion. We're a bit like a cheetah. We can go really well for a few days, but after that we quickly run out of gas.
So look, I wonder, Bede, and I hate making more action, but I just wonder if I could ask you as an SLT with Phil, just to think through John, a wee bit more of the nature of this risk. Is it one that would effectively be a strategic risk? In other words, in the way that Janice, you and I have been saying, well, this might be one that gets elevated. Well, if that's the case, it's elevated and understand it. But equally, if it's not, it would be good to know why I should look at those reds, recognise it is a high operational risk, Phil, but one which we can generally be comfortable with. And it doesn't create one that comes our way. Because as I say, it struck me there. So, Phil, I don't know if you feel comfortable with that, but it's just actually trying to, the message is here over something which is a stand-up and a needed stand-up and which can be challenging. I just wonder whether we've got the right focus on it, not at your level, but at management and at governance level. You want to comment on that, Phil? You're welcome to. You always come back at me, mate. You're welcome to.
Just seeking clarity then from your position, Mr Chair, are we looking at having 2 scales of types of events? A routine flood of 3 to 5 days versus a more significant response that goes regionally by AF8, Cyclone Gabrielle's type of event?
Oh, look, absolutely, and I think Pete gave that idea, Phil, that actually there is and in fact, Bede, I think, said this as well, but actually it might be useful to understand the nature of this risk, particularly over the size of the event. And if it's a credible event of only 2-3 days, you might say, well, actually, I'm in the green here, I can do it. But if it's something that's bigger, and what might that bigger be, it could be useful to understand whether we have. So let me put it this way: your prevent controls in the EOC are that you've got the staff internally to be able to manage it. What's the non-sexist term for manning something? That you can actually stand it up. Pardon? You man it. Okay, thank you. Whatever. that you can stand it up as you're meant to under the rules and credibly provide a community-based both response and recovery. Okay. When do we then have to go to? We can't do that, but we've then got to have some form of mitigation, and it might be our colleagues or whatever, and our standing arrangements with others. And actually, it might even be an event where actually it's we're struggling. That's what I'm looking for as a characterisation, because in fact, what it might do then, Phil, for us is minimise the nature of the risk. In fact, our current arrangements are fine, but at the moment it's a bit, you know, this is always the problem with summaries, it's a wee bit blunt, and the bluntness says we might have an issue here. Okay, thank you for that. Look, that's you'll only want to do it once a year, John. Scotty wants it every quarter now, don't you? Look, thank you for that, John. That is really helpful, and I do appreciate that. I wonder if we could just move to the recommendations, which we receive and note, and that we would ask management to come back just with a level of expansion on the emergency management risks, because I do note the other red was actually our ability to work around the 4 Rs, which is equally an important part of a credible emergency management response. Yes, John.
So I was about to say, Mr Chair, I've already sent an email to Filda to
No, okay. Well, I owe Philip here because he didn't know that I was going to raise that as an issue. So thank you for that. I do appreciate that. Do I have a second of that motion, please? Thank you, Nigel. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. How are we going for time? Jess, tell me to hurry up. Yes, yeah, thank you. Business improvement update. Sam, how are you? Go for it.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Mr Chair. Okay, we have the ESCA Procure to Pay project, which will commence in August 2023, and the go live is scheduled for December 2023. The project group has been formed, comprising of the group manager of commercial and strategy, chief financial officer, finance system analyst, accounts payable, IT, and continuous improvement. Then we have our Bookable, which is an online bookings and event management system. This venue build has been completed. UAT is user acceptance testing is in progress, with a go live internal on the 5th of July this week. And this is where more checks will be done, and we will also get some of our regulars within the community to do some testing in preparation for our go live external, which is the 26th of July. The events module will form part of stage 2 of this project, and we expect for this to commence in October of this year. Then we have the Assura 2.0 upgrade project. This has commenced in May. Workshops with different units are still underway to determine all the requirements. User acceptance testing has started with some of the modules that have already been built. This project is scheduled to be completed in August 2023. Yep.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it for a good comprehensive report. Folk, do we have questions for Sam or indeed staff that are here? No, look, that good effective report, and it's great to see those projects underway. I just did really probably have one or if not two, and they're probably more your way, Jason. One was the Magic IQ performance. It says July 2023, which is an auspicious date for this meeting. LTP budgeting and forecasting going live. Obviously, an LTP year. Yeah, that's all tickety-boo. We're on a soft landing there.
Actually, Andrea, have you got more of an update on that?
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yes, the Magic system is in the final phases of getting the LTP modelling set up within it. So they'll look to roll that out later on in July, and then with the intention of potentially using it for the LTP this year.
And look, again, it might be you, Andrea, or whoever, Sam, Jason, the Easy Rev. I was, in my slightly probably unknowing sense, looking at the critical issues and risks. A couple of them look more like how do you operate the thing appropriately, which means if you don't, it could be a risk, while the middle one, which I didn't quite understand around GL orders and not work orders, could be an implementation issue. Is, I guess, without trying to get into detailed discussions about that, are we? And I think we are able. We have gone live. It doesn't say whether we've completed. I presume we have. Are we able to use this? Because again, key area for our planning going forward. If not for the annual plan this year, gone, at least for the LTP.
EasyRev has been tested and has been installed. Go live will be around mid-July once they have struck the rates.
Brilliant. Okay, so just a wee bit to go, and it will be in July. So that's superb. That's great. Good. Okay. Any other questions, folks? Being none, I'll go to the resolution, which is we receive and note the update. Sam. Mover and a seconder. Thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Janice. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much, Sam. That's wonderful. Okay, procurement roadmap.
Through you, Mr Chair. So this is a bit of a quick report on procurement activities across council. There were a lot of procurement recommendations as part of the outstanding recommendations register. We pulled them out into a separate report so that we can sort of give an update of how we're going. Trudy's been busy recruiting, so it's good to know that we've got a procurement manager starting on the 10th of July. So that's a week today. So again, that's going to be fantastic having them on board, and they've got a good skill set and obviously in procurement. So we've still got Arc Blue who are continuing to assist us in this area. Probably the main key points I want to talk about are the procurement policy and standards, which have been drafted and around for a while, and we took an internal decision to wait till the procurement manager was in place before we finalise them, just so that we can ensure they're comfortable with them. They will come back to the next Audit and Risk Committee to endorse. We've been doing a lot of work on systems and data, so similar to the work that Deloitte did with, fraud detection, we have spent the last couple of months working on spend analytics dashboard. So essentially, once the procurement manager can turn up, we're going to have a whole suite of information in terms of how we spend, some of our taxonomy, where we've got issues and where we can focus. So ARC will present that information to us tomorrow. To receive the dashboard and to receive the information, and then that's quite timely with the procurement manager starting next Monday, so they'll have a suite of information to then start focusing our procurement efforts across council. So from my perspective, procurement is the corporate standard, it's the corporate guidelines, it's ensuring we're very clear. There's a lot of good foundations in land transport, particularly around the Waka Kotahi, so it's taking some of that stuff forward as well. And if I listen at council sometimes, at meetings we hear talk about procurement and procurement activities, it's just trying to create that corporate good practice, is how I would describe it.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. So again, very fulsome report. Questions, comments, folk? Yes, Scotty.
Yeah, just looking at the software and systems in particular, are there further efficiencies and gains to be realised through which some of your own suppliers use compatible systems?
Totally, and I think at the moment we're short on data and understanding, and so I think having the data being analysed in terms of where we spend, how we spend, what systems and process do our suppliers use, all to lead to easier purchasing, easier procurement, and just so that's a bit simpler for suppliers as well. So yeah, so that's certainly been looked at.
Thank you, Scotty. Questions? Just a couple from me, Jason, if it's okay. Again, it's a bit of look. This is all good stuff, and you've shown us before and I'm just going back to it, the roadmap, and it seems to me from your report. So I'm looking at page 178. That's the procurement roadmap. We seem to be online with where we plan to be, which is good. I think that's what you're effectively saying. So it just makes me interested then, when I looked at the procurement delivery audit findings and recommendations, I presume, whose findings are those actually? Are they the project control group or something's findings?
These are open audits from Audit New Zealand. There's been prior reviews done of our procurement practices, so we sort of packaged them all into this one area so we don't lose sight of them.
So again, this is a bit like my comments around fraud and corruption. I'm interested in some of the other bits of the ecosystem that need to be in place. There's been reference before about, and I've made it already, about staff interest registers, because it's a key part of procurement. Can you just remind me where we are? Because I think, can you just remind me where we are around contract management? And I also note that this also obviously needs to work in with our procure to pay work around ESCA and what have you. All the other systems inside will join in effectively to this.
So within, I guess, contract management quite wide, so within the land transport area, obviously with Whakatahi, they're very clear. We get separate audits undertaken by them. So I think contract management, we're talking about the procedures still to be co-designed. So the procurement manager will work across the organisation, take the best practice we've already got in some parts of the business. Because I think, as I mentioned at the start, we're good in pockets, I don't think we're good corporately. And so I think that some of the contract management, we need to embrace best practice where we're doing it better. And so that'll be co-designed. We just wanted the procurement manager in place so that they could lead it.
Oh, look, absolutely agree. And if you're going to start running, you've got to start walking somewhere, in the best place, I think, is procurement. But it'll soon make us as a committee probably a bit hungry to see good contract management as well, which naturally follows. Or rather, your point that actually it's comprehensive across the organisation, not just perhaps Andrew's land transport area, which has gone well. Can we move the recommendations, please, which we receive and note? I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Scotty. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Wonderful. I am trying to push things through, Jason and team, but I am grateful that we've had a chance to look at this and see that it's all great information. Andrea, you going to speak to the sensitive expenditure report, Andrea, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this attached sensitive expenditure listing is for the quarter January to March 2023. Just essentially, this is a continuation of the 6 monthly report that we put to the last Audit and Risk Council. And the final quarter is now being worked on because obviously we're new start of the financial year, so that's getting prepared for audit as we speak.
Thanks, Andrea. So we've got the schedule at the back with a sense of sensitive expenditure, our chances to just check the sort of the landings that we have. Obviously, from your perspective, Andrea, they do fit within our various guidelines. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those. Couple from me. COSI, is that your social club? No? What's COSI?
Oh, it's really the values that we have as an organisation. So it stands for customer, one team, success and integrity. And it's those who live those values. And we have COSI Superhero Awards every quarter. But so, yeah, no, it's not quite the COSI club that you might
I was wondering, actually, you're right. You can see I made a sort of an odd connection there. I had no idea what COSI was.
So we're not down there playing darts and pool or whatever. It's really about those team members who live those values by going, and it's assessed by their peers, and there's 5 a quarter. So they get nominated and then they get a prize for that. So, and it can be in a range of sort of different activities and across the organisation that we recognise that. So that's what it is. But the COSI stands for and we talk about our COSI, their COSI values. So which is customer, one team, success and integrity. Yeah.
Look, and just the last item there. Do you have a All-Star 5 vouchers? What was the All-Star? What's All-Star 5?
Yeah, so the All-Star 5, so we get nominations, and I think at the last one we had 11 or 12, and the COSI Committee award 5 vouchers a quarter.
Okay.
So that's what it is. So they're the All-Stars, and we do it we have a team meeting, and because we have a team talk every couple of weeks, and alternate weeks it's in the chamber here, and the other one it's online. And the COSI awards are given out at one of those team talks.
Oh, great. Yeah. No, that's good. That's fine. Thank you very much. Right, folk. Sorry.
Yeah, I've just been advised by the overseer of the Treasury that it is all budgeted. It sticks within the budget.
Okay, no, thank you. I made that assumption, to be honest, but again, it's just trying to work out why we have this spend, and actually it does sort of. That sounds too loose. It does fit indeed what we are trying to achieve, which is super. Look, you've answered my questions, thank you, and I'll never refer to it again as the COSI Club, sorry about that, because it comes up somewhere else, I think, as well. I think it's actually in the, it might be in the financial expenditure procedures, which I take it, by the way, are here for noting rather than for us to provide comment on. Any other questions or comments from folk? Right, let's go to the recommendation that we receive and note the sensitive expenditure report. We'll move in a second. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Peter. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Yes, it was. It was on page 206. You got the, what, you don't, I've got COSI in my brain. What do you call it? COSI? Cozy, thank you. Cozy committee, that's right, there we go, got it. Rightio, we're back to 613, which is the credit rating update. And Jason, I think you might take us through this, mate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this report is twofold. It's really to report back on the finalised published Fitch ratings. So at the March meeting, we brought them back in draft, and so I just wanted to bring them back in final. But the main purpose of this report is really we engaged Bancorp to undertake a piece of work for us around our council rating, but how we compare to our peers. And our peers in terms of this one were against Ashburton and Selwyn, because we felt they were similar sized councils, even though they've got different things going on. Selwyn have got a lot of growth, but it was still important to look at them. And it really, we asked the question, if we wanted to improve our credit rating, what would that look like? And so the report is attached as attachment 2. This is a topical area, obviously at council on Tuesday last week when we adopted the annual plan. Lots of really good questions around debt levels, debt caps, how do we fund, how are we going? So it's important as we lead into the long-term plan and particularly the financial strategy when we come to council and talk about these are the levers that we can pull with respect to funding the next 10-year plan. This is what the capital program might look like. This is what debts might look like. This is what rates might look like. We just really wanted to get a sense from our funders how we maintain our rating. So we're currently at AA minus. Selwyn and Ashburton are both at AA plus. Within paragraph 10 is probably the key one, that there's a lot of, I guess, fat already built into our AA minus rating. So we can increase, not that we're going to, but we can increase our capital spend or our debt, net debt up to about 250 million and still maintain that AA minus rating. So that gives clarity, I guess, to Bancorp and I guess Fitch in terms of how we sit. So really wanted to report back to the committee on that piece of work. Really, the cost benefit in terms of trying to change our rating to AA plus or higher is there's a lot of work that we would have to do, and we don't receive a whole lot of benefit from it. But it's important to note that even within AA minus, we still have a bit of scope at our debt levels. But really, the long-term plan is the key time, whereas an organisation and council laws will really have that discussion around debt going forward and what it might look like and what we choose to do and not to do. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that. Jason, do we have questions? Yes, Michelle.
It's not about debt, so don't worry.
Lots of homework on it.
I just wanted to know how often do we get the Fitch rating? Is that every year, and do we always get Bancorp to do the comparison, or is that just a one-off because we're leading into the LTP?
So certainly Fitch is an annual thing, so pretty much February each year, and look, it really drives the market, so it's a really important rating for us. This is the first time we've talked to Bancorp in terms of this, and it come out of some discussions that we've had in the committee over the last year or so around, look, there's not concerns around our debt levels, but I think we need to constantly be aware and be across them, and what happens if we pull a lever and our debt goes up, what does it do to our rating, and so on. So just a bit of comparison with other councils, everyone talks about it, and I think it's really useful leading into the long-term plan where we're going to have a few of those discussions.
Excellent, Michelle. Any other questions, comments? Just a couple of...
sorry, just
Or it's
Oh,
just
sorry,
comment
Nigel.
from me. No, I was quite excited by this, actually, as exciting as you can get around a report on Fitch ratings, because it's exactly that. It's going to put us in good steam for our financial strategy, etc. And we know the pathway is the pathway we've chosen, but those are some of the questions we had asked, so it's great to have them answered in that report. So thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Any other? So just a couple of questions of clarification for me, please. Jason, it's firstly, I focused obviously on paragraph 9 and 10 as well, which indicated that, within it, that's fine. And you've indicated that the net debt should be up to 250. So in paragraph 8, it says our long-term plan suggests that we'd get to 280, which of course is above 250. We're at 112 at the moment. So does that mean that for the long-term plan discussions, we're limited to 250 and not the 283?
No, I think this is a piece of information, and so the 250 is an arbitrary number, what it would take to maintain our AA minus rating. Obviously, the drought or the long-term plan had us up to 283 net debt, and so I think, as part of the discussion, that's probably what the Mayor was alluding to before, as part of when we go through the long-term plan process, we really need to, as a council, be aware of our cap levels, and also what does it mean for our Bancorp, or sorry, our AA minus or whatever rating. So it's more just a piece of information, but on the face of this, if we were going to 283, it's above the 250, so arguably,
yeah, we would be on some form of watch from Fitch. I think it's the key point I'm trying to make here. Okay. Yeah, go for it.
Unless you increased your revenue to mean that you stayed within that sort of 9 times multiplier, which would probably mean increasing revenue roughly by sort of, 15 million odd dollars.
I appreciate that, Bede, and I mean, I think I appreciate this is relative, that actually if your revenue line is fixed, we're saying with a credit rating that's about 250. And I appreciate that, as Jason has said, with your LTP, there are a number of levers. What interested me about this policy, and I think another page is actually quite important from the Bancorp report, is page 226. Which talks about optimising our debt and thinking actually about strategically what do we want to do with our debt. And I think, Andrea, that's something that I would be looking to understand as later on we probably understand where you're going with your LTP, is actually, some modest strategies there about how do you optimise your debt, and it's talking about green bonds. I know our GFA have been running around the country because green bonds come with a slightly lower interest rate. So, it's got to be attractive, but again, can we fit within it? And it becomes part and parcel of actually how do we think about our debt? What's our strategy around debt and how do we optimise it? The only other thing that I noted in that was a slight, what was interest to me, Jason, was the Fitch's emphasis on net debt. But actually, its net debt is worked out by the amount of investment you have that's convertible within the next 12 months, which is interesting because then it makes, if you want to maintain that sort of margin, you've got to then play the short market, not longer term investments, which all of a sudden creates a pardon? It does. That's more about liquidity, isn't it, rather than anything else. So I find it interesting that that's the situation, but it's just one of those little things. But it does reflect, ultimately, again, on that idea of our strategy around debt, as in contrast to our total financial strategy, is actually important. So I just note that. So look, it's a very helpful report. And as you've said, Nigel, you're already in the middle of your LTP, so it's great to have this bit of information that we've got there. Okay. No other questions? Let's just receive and note the report. I'll move that to a seconder, please. Please. Thank you, Michelle. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Thank you. John, you're very patient there, buddy. Thank you for being with us today. And it's great to have you here. So we're into the audit plan, for which we've got an engagement letter and a audit plan. We'll come back to the fee, but that's the troika that we're missing, or the third leg of the stool we're missing, but I appreciate that's still to come. Jason, I think you're going to lead off the batting on this one, please.
Yep, thanks. I'll just lead off very quickly, just highlight a couple of key things from my perspective. So certainly got the audit plan for 22-23, the partial interim audit 19 June, so that's was undertaken. Audit New Zealand undertook that remotely. Good progress by TDC and Audit New Zealand on that. In terms of the key focus areas for the audit, and look, John will probably talk to these, in terms of fair value assessments of PP&E and valuation of infrastructure assets, we've had WARS do a review of our three waters just to determine whether we're going to have to revalue. We have in our accounting policies, our threshold is 10%. WARS have come back saying it's about 9 to 9.1% movement, so we wouldn't be proposing doing a revaluation of three waters. And roading has come back by the roading value at less than 5%. So from staff's perspective, we won't be doing any revaluations. The other areas within the audit plan are all what we would expect, and I can let John highlight anything that he would like to.
Right. We've already discussed the timing on page 279, and I'll go right back to the letters up with.
Yeah.
We've got that process in there as well, which you obviously agree with, John.
Yes, and I think the key paragraph is actually paragraph 5. So the critical risk management on all those dates to hit 31 October is, look, it's a disciplined, coordinated effort by both council officers and Audit New Zealand. We need to make sure both Audit New Zealand and ourselves have the data on time, at the right quality, at the right, ensuring that it meets the standard that Audit New Zealand is looking for. Because Audit New Zealand will be under pressure to meet this deadline, and so we need to ensure from our perspective that we don't get in the way and that the information isn't to the highest standard. It does challenge us without completing this annual report for the year that the second year back now that we've finished. And so that will cause us some issues with opening balance sheets and opening things and the ability to do reconciliations and capitalisation. But because we're so focused on the annual report at the moment, we're just feeding straight into the next one. So it's not a bad thing.
John, sorry, did you not hear me? John, I'd like
No, I didn't hear you, sorry.
I'd like to invite you to address either or both of your letters, please.
Right. The simple one is the engagement letter. That's the Auditor General is the auditor of all public entities, of which Timaru District Council is one, and that audit engagement letter is just the standard terms for those engagements, and there's minimal change from the one from the previous 3-year period. So that's the key message there. In terms of the audit plan, Jason mentioned about the fair value assessments, and it's pleasing to see that Timaru's had war undertake those. What I haven't had the chance to check because of priorities last week, with it being 30th of June and electricity distribution businesses statutory deadline, I haven't reviewed what we did at the interim, but I was asking for us to look at those, but we will check those fair value assessments and come back to Timaru whether we concur with war or not. So I'm not expecting a problem with the roading because at 5% there's plenty of margin there. We'll just need to check on the three waters. So in terms of, agree with Jason, in terms of logistics, we've got a challenge to make 31 October because we're in a catch-up mode around the country for council-controlled organisations and moved from the 30th of November the last 2 years to 30th of September this year. So we expect to be able to have Timaru District Holdings adopt their annual report by 30th of September. But with this catch-up, we will have a lot of pressure on the last week of October. And that date of the 20th of October in there was that's the Friday before Labour weekend. So that was, yeah, if people were looking at why that date is there. So one of the good things, if I can call it that, and not wanting to be quoted on it, the government hasn't passed the updated legislation on three waters or affordable waters, so there's no issues with potentially how you account for those assets in your primary financial statements. Are they assets held for transfer? Well, at this stage, the legislation hasn't been passed. We've got the 30th of June for 2023 on Friday. So there will be standard wording come out from the Office of the Auditor General as to how that all the territorial and unitary authorities will need to disclose the situation with the outcomes of the proposed legislation. So the other bits in there are consistent with the audit that we're just about to complete. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrea. Good point. Under PX will obviously deal with the current audit. So this is about what is now also a current audit, which is the 30 June 23. Get that right? I was about to say 24. I was going to set it myself. 23 annual report. So comments or questions from folk at this stage? John, I would just, I just asked you the benefit of the committee, just note that the engagement letter from the Auditor General is for 3 years, which is standard. I've gone through the letter, it is a standard letter, as John says. It just is important in the sense that it does commit us to what are our responsibilities around good accountability and the expectations of the Auditor General. So I think that's fine. I do actually believe it's the responsibility of the committee to actually recommend Nigel signs. So I will be putting a small suggestion that at number 2, we recommend the Mayor does sign the engagement. You might have done it already actually, but we'll justify it anyway for you, Nigel. In terms of the annual plan, I mean essentially what I'm hearing is the issues are what we expected. You've done the first, probably the most tricky one, which is the fair valuation. And John, I've heard from you a commitment that while you've had some other priorities last week, you will get to this in the coming week. So we need to know, obviously, pretty quickly that while it's at 9%, it's still under 10. But I guess you want to check that in your calculations, it is under 10. And I think it is one. Personally, if I can give my view as the chair, that this is a vanilla audit we want to get out of the way, because we've got the LTP, and I know that John, it's going to be a challenge for auditors to get all audits through by 31 October. I think we've got to live with our margins. Okay, and also we've dealt with the issue of the timing and the challenge with that. And again, I've heard from you, Jason. You've acknowledged. We need quality information to go to John, just as much John needs to have the resources. I call this meeting, oh sorry Nigel, go for it man.
Just one question on the back of a letter to myself, and or mainly to myself, but Bede would have been copied from Waimate around Downlands, because they've requested that the information come through by the 30th of August. Is that going to be realistic? It's possibly more for you, Jason, but...
We can give them draft information, yes, but really we need to do a whole lot of work on capitalisation of assets and work in progress and the like. So we'll give them a set of financial statements for Downlands by that time, but until our audit is finalised, it makes it very difficult. We are proposing that they use draft numbers and do a wash-up the following year, which is what a lot of organisations do. So we're in discussions with their finance team around how we can make that happen.
Right, thank you, Nigel. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, go.
Just on that one, Mr. Chief.
Okay, sorry, so Michelle, is it okay if I let John go first? John, so the downlands.
Yes, so because we're in this catch-up mode, and it will be tricky for both Waimate and Mackenzie, is that it will depend on their auditors and the materiality of the balances from Downlands Water Scheme, whether they have to wait until Timaru has got audit clearance.
Key thing is we've got a plan, we've got communication, and if necessary, a fallback position, which should be acceptable. Okay. I always call this the honeymoon meeting, Jason. I can look at a plan and say I like it, and the dates fit 31 October. It's actually the committee's chance. I'll probably look at you as well, Andrea. It's the committee's chance to say, are you comfortable that we have got the resources, the systems and the QA processes in place to deliver to these dates? It's a question which I'm going to wait for an answer. Let's face up to it. If you've got concerns, let's say that now. This is what this meeting's for.
So I guess essentially we're one team member down, a key team member, that being the financial controller / finance manager. So that recruitment process has started. We've had at this point 3 candidates that look on the face of it reasonably good. So I guess we're just working through that. Ad doesn't close until the 11th of July. So then obviously depending on their notice periods, we should hopefully have a full contingent by the time we kick into this.
Okay, so we've got a challenge to get ourselves fully staffed up. Yep.
Probably the other, through you, Mr. Chair, the other challenge I note is that we're dealing with the previous audit from the previous year as well as this one, and an LTP, and that's very strange to be trying to do all 3 at once. So that is a pressure on the team, as well as delivering this financial year's budgets out to our teams that need to deliver the work.
I appreciate that. It looks like, Jason, you're about to burst the song too.
Oh, look, we've got good planning in place. I think we've learnt a lot through this annual report. Andrea's team have now all been through one, and I think that's a positive. We now know what to expect. Look, it's a plan. I want to say now we're going to meet it, and it's going to be difficult. But I think we've got the skill in-house. We've got the expertise we need. We're aware of our system challenges without having to do some of the valuations would be really useful to us. And at this stage, we're progressing on the basis we're going to meet it, acknowledging there might be challenges along the way.
So the employment you need is just to keep the home fires burning, not to deal with the annual report, correct? Great, okay, rightio. So we've got the expertise in place to do the actual annual report. We just have to make certain we can essentially backfill the spaces so that we can get that 100%. Rightio, so that's a risk, fair enough. Thank you for being up front. And that's one which I guess you'll monitor closely and dare I say, let the committee know if there are real issues. We just have to be up front about it. John, I said it's the honeymoon and it's a honeymoon. Can I just, Michelle, yes, sorry. Can I just ask John one more question, please? Sorry, I talked right over you. My apologies, Michelle. John, I mentioned the honeymoon, and honeymoon's between 2 people. Yep, you got it here. Well, it's not quite there. You've got the plan. John, a very similar question to you. We've been incredibly upfront here. Thank you, people, for where we're at. Have you got the resources and the time to do the job by 31 October?
So if the delivery is there, then we have. What we've done is that the Auditor General reallocated a number of audits over the last 2 years to other audit service providers. So our portfolio is smaller going into the 2023 June round. We've continued to recruit staff, so we've got the highest level of staff that we've had in Audit New Zealand. So we've got more staff fewer audits. So we've got the capability there. We've got the challenge of getting ready for the LTPs, but the getting these attest audits completed by the statutory deadlines is our priority, and we believe we can do it if the information is delivered to the required quality in the timeframes.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Sorry, Michelle, before I forget, sorry, a third time.
I just wanted to ask about point 15, which is the budget and the funding implications. I just didn't really understand that. If somebody could explain.
That's in Jason's paper?
In Jason's paper, yeah.
Actually, my question was on that one too, and it may not be a marriage made in heaven because the audit proposal fees a significant increase. So I'm not sure if it's a proposal we want to accept.
I was actually I was thinking of my analogy because I was going to raise the question, which is actually you need generally a ring for the honeymoon or to get there, and I don't think we've quite got the ring because that's the proposal. John, what's the state of play around the fee, please? I think that's essentially what we're asking both Michelle and Nigel, and I am as well.
Right. So the Auditor General has yet to provide for the district councils, and so not apart from the significant metros. However, I am not privy to how they classified those, but there are various councils besides the Christchurches and the Aucklands that have had their fee proposals come out and have been raised with those councils. Most of the rest of the councils that are territorial authorities and unitary authorities, the fees have gone to the Office of the Auditor General for for their assessment, because the fees are being charged on the Auditor General's behalf. Moderation is the term. So they have not come back from moderation yet. Right, so I can't put a fee in front of you. All I can say is that it will be a substantial increase. So that what the Auditor General has sent out a letter to all chief executives and chairs of Audit and Risk Committee. Did you get one, Nigel, as Mayor, outlining that he's through this process is looking to achieve sustainable fees, because the fees at the moment do not cover the costs, and that is a problem, not only to the Office of the Auditor General, but to firms that are offering audit services. So, yeah, there will be a substantial increase, and if you look at the experience over the last couple of years, the cost of the audit, costs of performing the Timaru District Council audit have been significantly above the fee, more than double it.
I respond. I'd suggest tying audit fees to the CPI or perhaps Burl. That would be even better for us. But just to note, though, I do recall, I think my first year in the role as Mayor, and I think the fees went up, and I recall them being around 48,000 or something like that. The number might be wrong, and understanding that there is a lot involved, and I take that point, but at what point do these stop going up? I know that there's a lot that's changed in the sector as far as resourcing, and I know the last couple of years have been quite tumultuous, but it does come back to what value the public is seeing from this, and that's the challenge that I see. And I know, John, you'll have your own frustrations here.
Yeah, I think that's a broader issue about particularly public sector audits and the increasing requirements and etc. And what value do they actually add to whoever might read the reports? But John, what does significant mean? Give us a band. Are we talking 100%, 50%, 10%, 200%? What are we talking?
Can I protect John from that? I don't think John knows. Sorry. I have a formula that works it out, but look, in all seriousness, we will face fees what won't have been allowed for in your annual plan, I suspect. So there will be an unbudgeted amount. For those that have received it, my last one was a good performing city, and it has gone up 50%. And I think John's indicating two things here. One, in his view, that the fee has never been commensurate, the hours allocated to this job have never been commensurate with the effort that's taken. Because I would make an assumption, John, that there will be a fee request over the current audit yet to be completed. Right. And so consequently there will be an hour increase to the job, and secondly there will be a rate increase, which is the recovery the Auditor General is talking about on it. So I suspect that, Nigel, we'll have quite a meaningful discussion somewhere down the track over the audit fee, but it is not going to be a small increase. So thank you for proffering 10%. If you meant 6.7, nice try. Look, I think in fairness to everybody concerned, it will be an eye-watering amount that we'll have to contemplate and consider what we do with. We are not, can I be honest, John can't be, I don't think we're in a position to debate that fully. Other than John, I can just tell you there's a head of steam getting up in the sector over the level of fees that are being charged, but that's for a different day, and probably for the Auditor General, dare I say it, rather than you.
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, sure.
And all of this seems to be bundled up in the fact that over the last few audits, it's, especially with central government the way it is, has drilled down into such a level that has never been to the level it has been before. And I just can't help but think a lot of that is about gathering more information based on the trifecta that they've had set up to realign us and push us in a direction where we're non-relevant anymore. But, you know, they set the benchmark and the parameters for it and then charge us richly for it. Seems ridiculous. You can't.
Nigel did receive, John is probably quite correct, because I think it was sent, I think you copied it onto me as well. There was an important letter from the Auditor General which indicated that he was under the requirements of Parliament that entities that are subject to audit should pay the full cost of that. With the implication being that up until now they haven't, and the taxpayer has been supplementing audit fees. So the Auditor General is driving a substantial change in ensuring that the sector or entities pay for their own audits. So yes, I think we can leave it there. Nigel, that there will be a meaningful discussion that we'll have to have with John, and particularly with the Auditor General when the fee comes, because I suspect, as I would say, we need to have a substantial discussion for the LTP, let alone how we deal with unbudgeted expenditure this year. Thanks there, John. Appreciate that. I wonder if we could move to the recommendations, which is one that we endorse the Audit New Zealand audit plan. But my second one is that we recommend the Mayor signs the engagement letter. I'll move that from the Chair, Rosinda. Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, is carried. Right, thanks to people. That's got us, oh no, I'm going to actually just move the final motion, which is that we go into public excluded. We have 10 items. So I'm going to move from the Chair that for those 10 items we move into public excluded. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Nigel. I'm always concerned that we do just debate that motion. Are people happy those 10 items are ones that should go into PX? Anybody want to have a crack at me for that recommendation? No? Good. Well, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you. Well, look, if we could reassemble, please. Oh, look, it's already 22. At 10 past, please. That would be great. Thank you.